The first thing the 100 families built at Ashbank Quarry was my gallows. By sunset, that timber would be their first permanent home, and twice as much wood would land on my head. At noon, I was still under the rope. Leja Tomasin stood beside the release lever with one hand on her daughter. Nell was 8, mud to the knees, staring at me with the rude concentration children reserve for condemned men and badly made furniture. The families had used their last straight beams for the platform. That told me two things. They hated me more than they feared the next storm, and if the execution failed, their construction standards would probably finish the job. Leja unrolled the charge sheet. She skipped my titles because the Crown had already taken them. Former defense minister, architect of the Black Pass retreat, signatory to the order that closed the outer gate on a civilian convoy. Then she stopped reading and looked directly at me. Her husband had been Thomas Thomason, the man who held the approach while Nell escaped through a drainage cut. She asked if I remembered his name. I did. Tomas had appeared on 3 casualty lists because 3 offices wanted credit for counting him. I had corrected the duplication in red ink. Ministerial service had trained my memory perfectly for paperwork and poorly for people. Leja asked whether Commissioner Crane had falsified the wagon manifest. Yes. Then she asked whether Crane had forced my hand onto the gate order. No. That answer moved several people closer to the lever. The rope tightened under my jaw. My boots rested on boards split along the grain. I could have explained the missing wagons, Severin's warning, the enemy fires beyond the ridge. None of it changed whose seal closed the gate. So I gave Leja the useful answer. I signed it. Tomas died outside because I decided the people behind my timetable no longer had a vote. If she pulled the lever, I would not call the sentence mistaken. Her fingers closed around the wood. Nell looked past her mother at the black clouds pushing over the quarry wall. She saw the weather before any adult did. Before Leja could follow her gaze, a chain snapped above us. The abandoned loading hoist had spent years leaning over the quarry like an unpaid threat. Wind caught its canvas brake, spun the arm sideways, and drove the iron hook through the gallows rail. The platform kicked under my boots. I dropped through one board, caught the rope with both hands, and felt the knot drag across my ear. Very dignified, exactly how a former minister should meet the working class. The hoist arm struck again, one upright folded. Leja jumped clear, but Nell ran toward her. The upper frame came down between them with the noose beam, 2 braces, and enough wet timber to crush a cart. Nell vanished inside it. Leja lunged for the nearest beam. A woman in a leather work coat grabbed her wrist and shoved her back. Tessa Marr did not introduce herself. She pointed at the sagging crosspiece and told everyone to stop touching things. I had seen siege roofs fail under stone. This frame was smaller, but the rule was the same. Remove the wrong support, and the load chose the softest thing beneath it. Here, that was a child. Nell coughed from inside the timber pocket. Leja dropped to her knees and called through a gap. Nell answered that her ankle hurt and a nail was touching her hair. Calm voice. Bad information. The execution rope still hung around my neck. I pulled it loose and moved toward the frame. 3 residents raised axes. Leja told them to let me through. The words sounded painful, which made them convincing. My first angle was fast. Cut the left brace, lift the noose beam, drag Nell toward the platform. I reached for a wood axe and asked Tessa whether the crosspiece would roll. She studied the split joint for half a breath. Then she said my cut would drop the iron hook through Nell's chest. The right brace carried more weight than it appeared to because the platform had twisted. Old habit told me to argue. I had the wider view. I had commanded engineers under bombardment. I also had a rope burn on my neck from trusting my own reading of this platform. I asked Tessa where she wanted the first cut. Her eyes paused on me, surprised only long enough to be annoyed by it. She marked 2 shallow cuts on the right brace, ordered wedges under the noose beam, and sent Pelcor to fetch the quarry jack. There was no jack. The soldiers who delivered me had taken it from the tool shed that morning. Pell returned with a cracked screw lift, 1 handle, and the expression of a man ready to use my spine as the missing part. Tessa changed the sequence. Leja slid a flat stone toward Nell and told her to protect her face. Pell and 2 others drove wedges. I took the broken handle, braced it against the screw, and leaned until the metal bit my palm. The beam rose 1 finger. Nell tried to crawl. Tessa stopped her. A roof tile trapped under the frame shifted, and the whole right side settled with a sound too quiet for its weight. My grip slipped. The handle tore skin from my hand and struck my ribs. The beam dropped half a finger. Leja made 1 sound, short and raw, then clamped both hands over the gap to keep Nell looking at her. Tessa told me to reset lower. She did not ask whether I could continue. Pell wrapped my palm with the condemned man's hood and shoved the handle back into my hand. The cloth already smelled better than my political career. This time we lifted together. Tessa cut the loaded fibers in 3 controlled strokes. Pell kicked the wedge home. Leja reached through, caught Nell under the arms, and pulled her clear as the iron hook punched into the mud behind them. The families moved at once. Etta then checked Nell's ankle and scalp. Tessa ordered everyone away from the unstable platform. Leja held her daughter so tightly that Nell complained she could not breathe, which was excellent medical news. Then the wind took the nearest tent. Canvas ripped from 6 pegs and wrapped itself around a cookfire frame. Residents stamped out the sparks before they reached the sleeping row. Beyond them, patched roofs lifted and slapped down in the rain. The gallows had failed. The camp was next. I looked at the surviving straight beams. 4 uprights, 2 cross pieces, the platform boards, and the frame of the prison cart that had brought me here. With fresh pins, that cart could still reach the southern road. Nobody owed me a room or a meal. If I repaired the cart under cover of the storm, I could reach the southern road before Leja found another rope. Nell tried to stand. Her canvas shelter had collapsed with the first gust, and rain was running through the blanket Etta wrapped around her. Leia looked from the child to the broken gallows and understood my calculation. She told me to take the cart. A man who had closed one gate should know how to use an open road. That was not mercy. She wanted to see whether I would take the open road once it was offered. I pulled the iron pin from the cart tongue and handed it to Tessa. The axle frame could become a floor support. The straight gallows posts could carry one small roof before the next wall of rain crossed the quarry. Tessa said a house needed footings, bracing, drainage, and a door that closed. I said we had perhaps an hour. She said we had less, because my gallows carpenters had cut every joint as if wood feared authority. Pell laughed once. He stopped when Leia looked at him, then kept smiling into his collar. Good. A camp that could laugh during my execution still had spare energy. We needed every piece of it. Tessa took control without a vote. Pell sorted usable stone. 2 women stripped nails from the platform. I dug 4 footing holes where the quarry shelf rose above the runoff line. Leja refused to move Nell into another leaking tent. She also refused to help me pretend this was redemption. She carried stones because her daughter needed a floor and corrected anyone who called it my house. Not mine. Nell's and hers. For 3 days since the Crown stripped my seal and pushed me toward Ashbank, a pale sentence had waited at the edge of my sight. Complete a safe, usable building. Give away every claim. Receive twice the materials used. I had assumed hunger or exhaustion had written it. Ministers see imaginary rules all the time. Usually they call them policy. The line sharpened when Tessa set the first post. The building had a declared recipient now. Nell and Leja. It also had a function. Shelter that could survive the quarry wind. I said nothing about the line. If it was real, we would know soon. If it was not, announcing visions while building for people preparing to hang me felt like poor reputation management. The first post leaned. Tessa slapped my shoulder, pointed at the base, and told me the stone was turning under load. I wanted to pack the gap with chips. She made me pull the post and reset the footing. That cost several minutes. It also kept the frame standing when the next gust hit. The platform boards shuddered. Nell hid behind Leia, and the post remained straight. 3 residents stepped forward after that. They did not offer their names to me. Tessa gave them jobs, and they obeyed her. 1 cut roof battens, another mixed clay, the 3rd carried tiles from the ruined quarry office. The work moved because every person could see the child waiting beside it. No speech was required. Tessa called dimensions. Pell corrected a warped sill with 2 wedges and an insult. I carried stone until my torn hand soaked through the hood cloth. At the south edge, the prison cart waited without its tongue. I could still reclaim enough timber to repair it. Every new brace made that choice less practical and more honest. Leja noticed me looking. She moved the remaining axle beam beside Tessa's cutting bench. No words. The road closed 1 piece at a time. We raised the second wall as the rain turned hard. Tessa rejected 3 cracked boards and used them for drainage covers instead. She wasted nothing, including my patience. I asked whether the rejected boards could carry the rear eave. She wanted to know if I planned to sleep under it. When I said no, she told me that was exactly why I did not get to lower the standard. Nell sat on an overturned bucket while Etta bound her ankle. She kept asking whether the house would have a window. Tessa said 1 small window. Nell asked whether rain could enter. Tessa said not if the former minister stopped cutting the frame short. The walls closed around a single room. Pell fitted a stone threshold. Leja packed clay into the windward seams. Tessa used the old release lever as a door bar because the iron was straight and nobody wanted it near a gallows again. The roof remained. Tiles from the quarry office covered most of it, but 1 corner lacked support. The easy answer was canvas. Tessa rejected that before I spoke. A usable house meant the next storm could not reopen the problem. We took the final crosspiece from the platform. The noose beam was heavy, its inner grain dry and marked by the rope groove above my neck. Pell trimmed the damaged end. I lifted while Tessa fixed the joint. The beam settled over Nell's room. The last tile clicked into place. Rain ran down both roof slopes and into the shallow channels Tessa had cut. The door closed against its bar. Inside, the floor stayed dry. Tessa checked every corner herself. She pressed the posts, tested the sill, opened the door, shut it, then made me replace one nail that sat proud beside Nell's shoulder height. Only after that did she call the building complete. The pale sentence across my site changed. Safe, usable, recipient present. My work counted in the footing, frame, roof, and door. One condition remained. I found the plain iron key in the old quarry office lock. Pell had filed it to fit the new latch. It was ugly, slightly crooked, and the first object in Ashbank that could make the next minute irreversible. Leia would not take it from my hand. She asked what I kept. Rent. A room. The right to reclaim the timber. A minister's emergency authority. I said none of it. The house, the ground fixtures, the door, and every future decision inside belonged to her and Nell. Leia asked whether I expected gratitude. I said I expected her to test the roof before trusting it. That was as close as either of us could get to polite conversation. Nell reached for the key. Leia covered her hand, studied my face, then accepted it herself. She said she accepted the house because her daughter needed shelter. Tomas remained dead. My name remained on the order. I agreed. The key turned in Leia's fingers. The pale line vanished. Pell looked at my face and asked whether former ministers often stared at empty ground after giving away property. Tessa told him to enjoy the silence while it lasted. Then the ground beside the house cracked. Worked timber appeared first, stacked in 2 neat rows. Cut stone rose beside it. Iron nails filled shallow wooden trays. Roof tiles followed in paired piles, each piece matching the grade and wear of what we had used. The original house did not change. The material beside it was new, ordinary, and exactly doubled. I had focused on an open patch as the return area. Unfortunately, I was standing in the open patch. A roof tile struck my shoulder. A timber stack pushed my knees out. I fell backward into a tray of nails, while 2 rows of stone rose around my legs. The miracle had excellent accounting and no respect for presentation. Tessa hauled me out by the coat before the final beam settled. She checked my head, found no blood, and informed me that future return zones would exclude the builder. Pell asked whether that was now a formal safety rule. Tessa said it became formal when the first beam hit me. Pell nodded with the solemnity of a clerk recording a national holiday. Leia did not laugh. Her mouth almost moved. Then she looked at the house and stopped. Nell had already opened the door and stepped inside on her wrapped ankle. The child touched the dry wall, the window frame, and the door bar made from the execution lever. Then she looked at Leia and asked when they would have to leave. Leia closed her fist around the key. She said they would not leave tonight. It was a careful answer, small enough for a woman who had learned what official promises cost. Nell sat on the new floor anyway. Rain hit the roof. Not one drop reached her blanket. That reaction finished the proof better than any cheering could have done. The families approached the returned stock in a wide half circle. Some touched the timber. Others checked the stone for quarry marks. Bramsay bent one nail against another and confirmed both were ordinary iron. Tessa inspected the return. Every beam matched one incorporated into the house. No extra species, no improved grade, no finished tool. Twice the material used, sorted by type, and nothing else. Oda Rill pushed through the crowd carrying a ledger under her apron. She looked at the new house, the doubled stock, and me standing with a tile-shaped bruise on my shoulder. Her first question was whether the miracle had produced onions. It had not. She checked the nail trays. No salt. She kicked the timber pile. No flour. Then she opened the ledger on the driest returned board and showed us the camp's actual future. 100 families had food for 5 days. That count assumed thin portions, no spoiled sacks, and no second storm blocking the river road. Children already received more than adults. Oda could cut portions again, but then the workers building shelters would lose strength first. The returned materials changed no line in her book. For half a minute, every bad idea arrived at once. Build houses for everyone. Sell all the timber. Tear the first house down and gift it again. Flee before the food ended. Use the returned beams as firewood. Tessa killed the demolition idea by pointing at the rule we had already proved. The house belonged to Leia. Nobody could recycle another family's home to feed a system we barely understood. Leia placed herself in front of the door. That discussion ended. Selling everything sounded smarter until I counted transport and demand. Ashbank's nearest villages could use lumber, but not enough to feed 100 families. Flooding one market would cut the price before the second wagon unloaded. We needed food that renewed, not one dramatic purchase. Fish from the river, grain from downstream farms, salt through the landing markets. All of it required a route and people willing to trade with a condemned camp. Oda asked what we could offer besides raw boards. Tessa looked at the returned stone and said flood-safe sheds. Fishing households lost racks every spring. A completed drying shed could protect their catch and return its construction stock after a real transfer. That idea did not create food. It created something another family might exchange for food. The difference was going to keep us alive, assuming the river remained open. Pell picked up the hammer Tessa had used and held it out to her. He did not offer it to me. He said if she marked the next footing, he would dig it. Two more residents stepped beside him, not supporters, not followers. Builders willing to work under the person whose frame had kept Nell alive. Tessa accepted the hammer. She asked Oda which structures would improve food fastest. Oda named storage, smoke, and river access. For the first time that day, the argument pointed forward. We carried the ration ledger and one returned beam to the quarry rim. From there, the river cut across the valley below us. A cable ferry linked Ashbank to the southern trade road. Ket Arlo stood on the far landing beside the winding post. He saw the gathered families, saw me, and pulled the locking pin from his coat. He set it through the winch. The ferry cable sagged into the current. Nobody could cross without Ket releasing that drum. On his post hung a fresh board painted with the royal contract mark of Salt Vey. Trade with Darien Vale, his agents, or the unlawful Ashbank camp was forbidden. Cargo could be seized. Ferrymen could lose their route rights. Anyone feeding us would inherit our punishment. Oda closed the ledger. 5 days remained. Behind us stood enough material to build several more homes. Across the water sat every sack of food we could not reach. Ket lifted one hand from the far bank. It might have been an apology. Then he wrapped the chain twice around the winch and locked it. Oda Rill gave the miracle one working day to produce a turnip. That was more patience than most gods receive, and she wanted it on record that she had been generous. The doubled stock from Nell's house sat in sorted piles beside her door. Timber, cut stone, nails, tiles, enough to frame 4 more buildings, and none of it edible. Pelcor had licked a nail to be thorough. Oda's logic was clean. Nobody knew what a food building would return, and she refused to run 100 families on the word of a man who had owned the rule for 3 days. So we built a root store. Tessa Mar cut it into the quarry shelf where the ground stayed cold. Stone base, timber cribbing, a slatted floor for draft, one heavy door. I dug the trench, carried stone, and pinned the sill while she cut the joints. Pell put a sack of turnips inside first, on the reasoning that the turnips would be in the building, and the building doubled. Oda allowed it. She would rather lose 14 turnips today than wonder about them all winter. The store was done before the fog lifted. Cold, dry, safe, usable. Oda's crew accepted it as a group, and I surrendered the claim, the key, and all future control over its contents. The pale line crossed my sight and cleared. Boards appeared in 2 rows. Cut stone rose beside them, nail trays, a coil of the same strapping we had bent around the door. Oda counted the sack. 14 turnips, one still bruised where Pell had dropped it. She cooked them because a woman with 4 days of food does not leave 14 turnips in the dirt to make a point. Then she wrote one line in the book. Buildings return buildings. Food returns nothing. She called that useful. Not comforting, useful. She had spent half a day and a theory and would never again lie awake wondering whether she could have fed children with lumber. The camp took it worse than she did. A man at the cook fire said the miracle was a joke told at the expense of hungry people. Nobody argued. 4 days of food leaves very little room for theology. Tessa had spent the entire test looking at the river. She asked what the downstream households lost every spring. Racks, Oda said, without reaching for the book. The fishing families at Sedgeford dried their catch on open frames, and every flood took the season with them. Tessa's proposal was 9 words. Build them a drying shed above the flood line. The shed would belong to whichever household accepted it. Free, permanent, no rent, no lien, no clever paper with my name at the bottom. My rules stayed intact, and the stock came back to us. It also created nothing to eat, and I said so. She said that was my problem with an obvious answer. People who still have their catch have fish to spare. People who lost their racks have nothing to trade at all. Oda set what a day of Ashbank labor was worth in fish and grain. The numbers were hers. If I came back with worse terms to close faster, she would walk to the far bank and discuss it with me there. There was one difficulty. Every route to Sedgeford crossed the river, and the river had a lock on it. The cable sagged into brown water, carrying half a hillside toward the sea. Ket Arlo stood at the winding post on the far side with his locking pin still through the drum, and Soltve's notice hung behind him. The same prohibition was painted across its plank. No trade with me, my agents, or Ashbank. Cargo seized. Ferrymen stripped of route rights. The paint was fresh enough to smell from our bank. I called across that we wanted passage, no cargo. Ket took a long time crossing that sentence in his head. Then he pulled the pin and let the ferry come to us hand over hand, the current shoving the deck sideways. He was 52, built like rope that had been under load for 40 years, and he would not look at Tessa. The notice forbade trade. 2 passengers and their tools were not trade. He could carry us and stay inside the letter of it. A good argument. I had built a career out of arguments shaped like it. What I noticed instead was the coat, new oilskin on a ferryman whose boots had holes. He said his sister's household at the lower reach had enjoyed a good spring. We loaded Tessa's drawings, Oda's price sheet, and the seed ledger into an oilcloth tube, and 10 lengths of dry timber along the transom, because wet wood would not take the joints she wanted. The ledger held every seed sack in the camp, which family kept it, and what had to be held back for planting. Sedge Ford would want to know what we could grow before they bet a winter on us. Nell came down as we cast off and asked whether the ferry would come back. Leja Thomason took her hand and did not answer, which was the most honest thing said at that landing all day. The river had gone the color of wet clay and was carrying whole trees. Ket worked the tiller and let the cable do the rest, angling the deck so the current shoved us across. Halfway over, he told us about the bar. Gravel, 100 strides downstream, and if the cable ever went slack, we would want the bow pointed at it. Tessa asked why it would go slack. Ket said cables did as they liked in a flood. He had a plan for that bar. The river got to it first. Solt's men cut the main line early. It did not snap over our heads with a warning crack. It went soft. The deck stopped fighting the water and started traveling with it, and the far landing began sliding upstream of us at walking pace, then faster. Ket came off his mark instantly. Whatever he had arranged had not included losing the line with 3 people on the deck. He threw his weight against the tiller, and the river handed us a tree. It came in root end first and hit like a siege ram with opinions. The deck bucked. The tiller bar swung through its full arc into Ket's chest, and the frame folded down and pinned him to the transom. The tube went over the rail on the first roll. I caught the strap. Tessa caught my belt, and for 2 seconds we were a very stupid chain of 3 people and 1 tube. Then Ket made a sound I had last heard at Black Pass, from men under wagons. 2 things on that deck were worth counting. Under the frame, a ferryman with a tiller bar across his ribs. On the rail, a tube holding Tessa's drawings, Oda's prices, and the 100 families' seed record. The timber lashing ran under the tube strap, and that lashing held the frame on his chest. Cut it, and the timber takes the tube into the river. Work the tube loose first, and the flood gets another 10 seconds with Ket's ribs. I cut the lashing. The timber went and took the tube with it. The frame lifted a hand's width, which was not enough, so I put my shoulder under the tiller bar and pushed until something in my chest reminded me about yesterday. Ket came out coughing river and swearing at me. Tessa was already at the stern with a hand axe, taking the cross braces out of a boat we were standing on. The cable was gone, the frame had 40 feet of good rigging, and the bar was coming up on our right at the speed of a bad idea. She threw. She missed. She hauled the rope back hand over hand while the bar slid past its best angle, and the second throw caught a snag on the head of the gravel. The rope came tight and the wreck swung around it like a door closing. We hit hard enough to put all 3 of us on the boards. Then we were aground, tilted, 100 strides from a shore we could walk to. Ket lay there and looked at the sky. He said the cable had been sound that morning. I said I knew. He looked at me then for the first time since the landing. The fishing families came out in 4 pole boats, crewed by people who had watched a ferry come down their river sideways. They pulled us off and did not offer names. Wood floats. The 10 lengths had gone in lashed loosely together, and the same bar that stopped us combed most of them out downstream. The Sedgeford crews had them stacked before we reached the bank. The tube had gone under a snag, and they found it at dusk. Tessa's drawings lived because she works in pencil on oiled paper and rolls them tight, with Oda's price sheet rolled inside them. The seed ledger had been at the open end. It came out as gray pulp in a leather cover. Every sack of seed in Ashbank, who held it, what had to be kept back for planting, now existed in Oda Rill's memory and nowhere else. I had traded that ledger for Ket's ribs and would make the same trade again. Oda was still going to walk 100 doors with a candle and rebuild it by hand, and that bill landed on her, not on me. The river had taken 10 of Sedgeford's racks in one night. They stood out in the shallows, open frames of pole and lath, and the catch that had hung on them was somewhere near the sea. Their speaker was Maro Fen, who had spent his morning pulling my ferryman off a gravel bar and had been regretting it since. Everyone on that river knew my name. He asked me politely whether I had come to close a gate on them too. I said no. Then I told Tessa to talk because the argument we had brought was hers. She unrolled the drawings on a fish crate, stone piers, 4 feet above the highest flood mark on their own wall, which she had read off the stain on the walk-in. A slatted deck, louvred sides, a roof that shed weather. Morrow said his people had wanted that for 30 years and had never had the stone or the spare season. Tessa said the stone was lying in their river. A flood bar is a heap of sorted rock, already carried downhill. Morrow asked what it cost. That question was where the band lived, so I took it. Solt's notice was a transport writ out of Crane's contract office. A transport writ bites carriers and cargo, and it has teeth for nothing else. So we would not be carriers, and there would be no cargo. The sheds were a gift. Nothing owed, nothing pledged, nobody at Sedgeford signing anything. A gift is a transfer without consideration, and a writ against trade has no grip on one. Morrow pointed out correctly that the fish would still have to move. It would not move as cargo. His household would own the sheds, hire hands to gut and salt the catch, and pay them in fish and grain at the end of every day, out of his own door. Ashbank would supply the hands. They would walk down, work, take the day's wage into their own fists, and walk home carrying what a working person carries. No carrier, no consignment, no manifest for Crane's office to seize. Morrow asked what happened when Solt came to burn his new sheds. I said they would be his, on his ground, and burning them would be arson against a household with 31 witnesses. Solt's power came out of contracts, and a contract needs a defendant who signs something. Tessa added the part I had missed, which was that Sedgeford would lose 10 more racks next spring, whether or not one soul from Ashbank ever crossed again. They took the deal that evening, and they took it for the racks. We built the first shed in 2 days. I carried cobble, set piers under Tessa's string line, pinned 6 of the 10 lengths, and hung the door. That was enough for the rule, and more than enough for my dignity. 40 people from Sedgeford did the rest, and they worked faster than my old engineer corps, mostly because nobody there was waiting to be told a thing twice. On the second evening, Tessa walked the deck, put her weight on every third slat, opened the door, shut it, and said the word. I transferred the shed, its key, and every future decision about what the Fenn household dried under that roof. Hessa Fenn took it because her son was still deciding whether he trusted his own hands with a key from me. The ground beside the shed cracked and paid. Timber in 2 rows, cobble in sorted heaps, which is not a thing River Rock has ever done unassisted. Iron pins in a tray, lath in bundles. I had chosen the return ground this time and stood well clear of it, and Tessa noted that the former minister could be taught. 31 households watched a heap of rocks sort itself, and nobody cheered. Hessa Fenn hung the first fish of a ruined season, came back out, looked at the pile, and asked whether we could do it again before the next flood. We did. The stock from the first shed framed the second and the third, and by the 4th day, Sedgeford had a rack line above their flood mark, and spare timber besides. None of that was food. The food came out of Morrow Fenn's door in a handcart at the end of a working day, paid to 12 Ashbank adults at Oda's posted rate, counted by a Sedgeford boy because Morrow wanted his own tally. 2 piles sat on that bank. Materials, which appeared out of nothing because I gave away a building. Fish and grain, which existed because 31 households and 12 hired hands worked 4 days under a roof. Only one of those piles was going to keep us alive, and the miracle had nothing to do with it. Oda's book went from 4 days to 11, and 11 was worth more than the number said, because 11 was a wage. A wage arrives again tomorrow. A sack does not. Ket worked all 4 days with a strapped chest and the face of a man attending his own inquest. On the 3rd night, he sat down across the fire and told me the whole arrangement unasked. Solt had come to him 9 days ago with a map of the lower reach and the names of his sister's household written on it. Not a threat, exactly. A list. The notice on the post had been the small part. The bar was the rest. Ket was to put the ferry on the gravel, cut us loose, and swear the cable had failed. We would walk home 3 days with the food clock running, and Sedgeford would never hear our offer. He said all of it flat, in order, hands on his knees. Then he told me the piece that had turned him. Solt's men cut the line 200 strides above the bar. Ket had not reached his mark. He was still on that deck, still working the tiller, with his own plan half finished under his hands. They cut it anyway. Solt had never been buying a stranding. Solt had been buying a drowning, and he had been content to include the ferryman in the delivery. Ket said his sister's household had never been safe. They had been the fee. I did not forgive him. I am careful with that word for reasons of my own, and I have never been sure it applies to a transaction. I told him he would say all of it again at Ashbank, in front of Leah Thomason, and that the decision would not be mine. He said that was worse than being expelled. I said yes. We came home by pole boat on the 5th day with 2 handcarts, 12 working adults, and a ferryman who had to be helped up the quarry path. Leja was waiting at the top, because Ashbank had eyes on that river from dawn. She wanted him expelled and said it plainly, with Nell's hand in hers. He sold the route. The route was the food. Selling food meant for all 100 families is a thing you do once, and then you live somewhere else. 3 years ago, I would have decided it standing there, weighed it, called it, and been satisfied with the weighing. I had a rope burn on my neck from the last time I did that at scale, so I did the only thing I have ever found harder than deciding, which was to say out loud, in front of all of them, that it was not mine to decide. Oda called it a hearing because it needed a name. It was the 100 families on wet ground around a fire, which is no kind of court. Ket stood in the middle and said it again. The map, the names, the bar, the cut line above his own head. Leja asked him one question. She asked whether he had known the camp would starve. He said yes. That answer nearly ended him. Somebody had a rope inside a minute, because Ashbank had recently developed a habit. Tessa took it out of his hands. The camp had built 1 gallows this week. It had cost them their last straight timber, and she would not cut another child out of the next one. Then Oda asked the question that decided it, and it had nothing to do with justice. She asked who else could read that river in a flood. Nobody could. Everyone knew the answer before she finished asking, because Ket had worked that crossing for 30 years, so they did not expel him, and they did not forgive him either. They took the ferry away from him. The keys went to a rotation, 3 households at a time, changed every 8th day, drawn by lot, and Ket could work the crossing only with one of them on the deck. He kept his hands on the tiller and lost the right to be the only person deciding where the boat went. Savin Rowe spliced the cut cable back onto its drum, with Ket chest deep in the current holding the line because he would not let anyone else do it. Bram Saye wrote the rotation on a board and nailed it where the trade notice had hung. Leja voted against all of it. She lost, she stayed, and she took her turn on the deck when her lot came up, because the alternative was letting other people decide her river for her. Nobody called it justice. Leja did not, and I did not. What the camp got out of that fire was a ferry with 4 hands on it instead of 1. Ket gave us the last piece while Edaven strapped his ribs. Solt had told him to keep the crossing shut until the offer. I asked what offer. He had not been told the terms, only the shape. Solt would come in daylight with witnesses and put something in front of the 100 families that they would be too hungry to refuse. Ket's work had been making sure they were hungry enough on the day. Then he added that Solt had asked how many adults in camp could still swing a hammer through a full day. I set down the cup. He had wanted a head count of the strong ones. Oda's book said 11 days in climbing. The sedge Ford racks were filling. The ferry had 4 hands on it and a rotation nailed to a post. And somewhere down the southern road, Solt Vey was counting our backs. Solt Vey came up the quarry road at mid-morning with 9 witnesses, a folding table, and no doubt that the day already belonged to him. He set the table on the flat where our gallows used to stand. That was deliberate. Everything Solt did that day was deliberate, which is why it took me until the smoke to understand what he had actually come to buy. The offer was generous, and that was the first problem. 8 permanent houses, standing and certified by sunset, and the quarry road reopened under royal contract. Legal carts, legal grain, a trade route that did not depend on 1 cable and 1 flood. If the 8 were not standing, 40 Ashbank adults went to Crane's road cruise for a season. Oda did the arithmetic out loud before anyone could get sentimental about it. 40 adults gone meant the Sedge Ford wage line died, and the wage line was the food. 11 days would be 4 again inside a month. So the wager was never about houses. It was about whether we could afford to refuse. Solt knew we could not. He also knew something worse, and he handed it to me by accident when he said the number. 8. Not 4, which we could have done half asleep. Not 20, which would have been an insult. 8 by sunset, on ground where a returned pile of timber and stone sat in plain sight. Somebody had done the arithmetic. Gift a house, receive twice its material, frame 2 more from the return, gift those, receive twice again. 8 by sunset was tight and possible, and it was possible only if you already knew exactly how my rule worked. Crane knew how the return worked. Somebody had been counting my nails since the first pile landed. I said none of that at the table. I kept one thing back, and that morning it was the only thing I had. Then the assembly took the offer away from me, which was the part Solt had not costed. He had come to negotiate with a disgraced minister because a disgraced minister is one signature and one vanity. He got 100 families and a woman with a death roll in her coat. Leja Thomason made him write it down. All of it. Terms read aloud, in front of his own witnesses, before one shovel moved. Then she made him add hours. The count would be taken by the Royal Circuit Clerk, Farron Ost, who happened to be riding the valley that week, and who answered to a bench rather than to a contract office. Solt's inspectors could watch. They could not certify. No adult could be seized for road labor without Ost's independent count and his seal under it. Fraud by either signer let Ost detain that signer, and the contract guards had to obey. He agreed to all three, easily, in the tone of a man who does not expect to be judged by any of them. I watched him agree and felt nothing useful, because a man who accepts every clause has already decided the clauses are furniture. Farron Ost was 50, dusty, and visibly annoyed to be included. He said his commission required him to certify what stood in front of him and nothing else, and that if anyone tried to buy him, he would record the attempt in the same ledger. Solt smiled. Ost did not. Then Tessamar looked at the ground and told us the fastest way to lose. The fast way was one row. 8 houses shoulder to shoulder, sharing walls, one long roof line, half the footings, and 2/3 of the timber. On flat ground, with the stock we had, that was a sunset job with hours to spare. She refused it. She wanted 8 separate houses with gaps between them, 2 full cart widths, every gap, no exceptions. Water barrels standing in each gap. Fence panels between them pinned rather than nailed, so a person could pull one out by hand and open a lane. That cost us stone, timber, footings, and about 3 hours we did not have. Bramsay fought her hardest, and Bram was not wrong to fight. He had 40 names in his head. He had spent his life around camps where the strong adults got marched off for a season and came back short, or did not come back at all, and he could see those 40 walking down that road while we argued about empty ground. He asked what the gaps were for. She said wind and fire, which builders have been saying for 600 years. A row of joined houses on a dry shelf in a quarry wind is one building pretending to be 8. Bram said we were not under attack, we were under a clock. She said that was what worried her. Solt's inspector spoke then, helpfully, from beside the table. He observed that no clause in the wager required gaps, that no code in the valley required gaps, and that the honorable builder was choosing to spend her neighbors' backs on a preference. On paper, he was right. The deeper trap was making every hour Tessa spent on safety look like an hour stolen from her neighbors. Solt could blame her at sunset. I stood and backed her before the whole camp. I had no idea about the fire. Claiming otherwise would flatter me, and it would be a lie. I backed her because I have signed one timetable in my life that treated a safety margin as waste, and Tomas Tomasin died beyond it. I said the builder's line stands. The gaps go in, and if the sun beats us, then the fault is mine to carry in front of Ost's count. Leja looked at me for a long moment when I said Tomas's name, gave no answer, and went for a shovel. The negotiation ended there, and the work began. 8 families chose the details of their own houses. Their decisions slowed the crews, but a home accepted under pressure would have defeated the entire gift. The Dorn household wanted their door on the lee side because their youngest sleepwalks and the quarry edge is 40 strides from the step. Pelcor put a proper flue in the 3rd house because that family cooks indoors, and he refused on principle to build a chimney that lied about where smoke went. A woman named Ista moved her window twice. Tessa moved it twice without comment, because a window is cheap before the wall goes up and expensive afterward. The 6th family needed a wider lee side door because their grandmother walked with 2 sticks and could not turn through the standard opening. Tessa widened it, moved one brace, and added a handrail from rejected roofstock. It took 14 minutes and meant the woman could enter without being turned sideways by her grandsons. My contribution was the bottleneck, and it was funny for about an hour. The rule needs my hands in the fabric. Real work. On every single building. 8 houses meant 8 sets of footings, frames, roofs, and doors, with the former defense minister physically inside them. Tessa put me on the work order as a line item, between nails and water. She scheduled me across the 8 sites with a wax pencil and told me that if I stopped to make a speech, she would dock the speech from my dinner. I dug. I carried. I pinned sills. I hung 4 doors, got the 5th wrong, and hung it again while Savin Rowe stood behind me making a sound like a kettle. The gifts went one at a time. The families did not receive a miracle in the abstract. Each received a house, tested it, and then decided whether to accept it. Ista took her key and immediately tried the window she had moved twice. It opened. She shut it. She opened it again. Then she went inside and stayed there. and her husband stood in the doorway and told anyone passing that the window was where his wife had put it. By the fourth house, the cascade was running. Gift a house, the ground cracks and pays, and the payment frames the next two before the dust settles. Cut stone falling out of nothing is a miracle twice. By the third time, it is a delivery, and people stopped watching the piles land and started complaining about where they landed. I began to enjoy myself then, and I should have known better. Because Solt was not watching the houses at all. He spent the afternoon at his table being pleasant. His inspectors measured things, then measured the same things again. At the seventh house, they wanted a footing depth verified and then re-verified, and Ost allowed it, because his commission said watch and watching costs nothing. At the eighth, they asked for the door to be hung, unhung, and rehung in their sight. I did it. It cost 20 minutes, and I remember thinking that the delay was the attack. The seventh house went up. The eighth went up. The sun sat 2 fingers over the quarry rim. Farron Ost stood to walk the certification line, and Solt's inspectors asked very politely for one more measurement. Every soul in Ashbank was standing in one place, faces pointed at one clerk and one door, holding their breath over one certificate. Then Nell said the word, smoke, and nobody heard her, so she said it again with her whole chest. The dry storage stood at the camp's north edge, 200 strides off, and it held everything we had earned: salted fish, Sedgeford grain, the last of the seed, every one of the 11 days. It was burning from the outside in. Solt's generous offer had bought him exactly one thing, and it was never carpentry. He had bought a crowd. He had purchased a certification ceremony that would stand 100 families 200 strides from their entire food supply facing the wrong direction at the driest hour of the day. The houses were never the wager. We were. Bram's whistles went before anyone gave an order, because Bram had never once believed the day was about houses. 2 blasts, then 3. Children out, tools out, barrels up. His cells moved without waiting for me and without waiting for Tessa, and I have never been so glad to be unnecessary. The wind came off the rim and pushed the fire toward the timber stock, and the timber stock stood beside 8 new houses with 8 new families in them. Tessa's gaps ate it. The fire crossed the first fence line, hit 2 cart widths of bare ground, and found nothing to reach. Somebody pulled the pin panels out by hand, and the gap became a lane, and the lane became the road the barrels came up. 9 hours of argument bought that ground, and it paid for itself in under a minute. A joined row would have been one building. One building with a fire in it is one fire. Ket Arlo brought the river up that lane. He had the ferry rotation on the water inside 4 minutes, 2 households on the poles, and they ran barrels from the landing to the gap until his strapped ribs gave out, and Harlsay took the yoke off his shoulders without being asked. The storage itself was the problem. It stood shut, packed, and heating, and the heat had nowhere to go except through the door, and the door faced our timber. Pelcour went up the outside wall. He is a mason and a chimneyman, and venting is close to religion for him. If the roof opened, the heat would go up instead of out, and the store would burn slow and downward instead of blowing its door across the yard into 200 lengths of dry pine. He cut the vent with a hand axe while lying on hot slate. Savin braced the ladder and shouted the load count through the smoke. Pell got it open, took the column of it full in the face, and Harl and 2 others dragged him off the roof and clear with his eyes streaming and his lungs full of the last of our barley. Etta Ven had him breathing through wet cloth inside a minute. She said smoke, not burn, and then told me to move because I was standing in her light. We saved most of it. Most is a word that costs. We lost a third of the dry stock. Oda's book went from 11 days back to 8 before the ashes cooled, and every one of those days had been paid for by somebody's back at Sedgeford. Leja found the trail while the rest of us were still throwing water. She was not tracking. She was walking the burnt edge with her jaws set, and she stopped because she smelled lamp oil, where lamp oil had no business being, in a camp that could not afford lamps. I read the stripe. That much I can do. It ran 40 strides along the windward face, poured in a line rather than splashed, laid so a whole wall catches at once instead of a corner catching slowly. It was a siege trick. It had been done by somebody who had been taught. It ended at a crate in the gorse. The crate had a contract mark burned into the lid, not a smudge, not a guess, a supply mark, the kind a broker stamps so his own carters do not lose his oil on the road. Leja did not touch it. She stood over it and called for Farron Ost by name, in her carrying voice, across a burning camp, and she kept calling until the royal circuit clerk was standing beside her looking down at Soltve's mark on Soltve's crate with Soltve's oil still in it. Then she called for Solt. He came. He had to. His 9 witnesses were watching, and he had spent the whole morning teaching them that he was a man who honored terms. Ost certified the 8 houses first. He did it with the smoke still up, walking each one with Tessa, testing doors and sills, because his commission said certify what stands in front of you, and a fire is not a legal excuse. Solt's inspectors had gone to watch the flames and had certified nothing at all. 8 houses, 8 families holding 8 keys. The road clause activated at sunset under the clerk's seal, and 40 adults stayed exactly where they were. Then Ost opened his other ledger and read the crate mark aloud. He read the mark, then the number beside it, then the office it was registered to, then the name on the registration. He read it the way clerks read, flat and without malice. And I know of no more frightening register. Solt's face did not do anything dramatic. It simply stopped being interested in us. Men can argue with an accusation. Solt could not interrupt a circuit clerk reading his own crate number, office, and registration in public. Farron Ost entered Solt's detention under circuit authority. The witnessed clause required Solt's contract guard to surrender him if fraud touched the wager, so the men who came to watch us fail took him into custody. Solt had signed because he never expected the clause to reach him. Nobody cheered. We were too tired and the camp still smelled like our winter. Oda stood at the black edge of the store counting what was left with a stick, and for a while that was the only sound in Ashbank. The assembly did one piece of business before it let anyone sleep, and Bram Say was the one who called for it. He had spent the morning arguing against those gaps in front of every family here, and he stood up in the ash and said he had been wrong in public, so he would be wrong in public. Then he moved that the builder's line be binding. No wager, no clerk, no minister, and no vote could overrule Tessamar on whether a thing was safe to stand in. It carried without account. Farron Ost wrote it into the certification record as a settlement standing order because it happened under his eyes, and his commission said, "Record what stands in front of you." That is how Ashbank got its first law, not from me, from the man who lost the argument, at the top of his voice, 12 hours later. Tessa sat on a water barrel in one of her gaps and studied the bare ground until the crews had gone. I did not explain her design to her. I sat 2 barrels away and shut up, which took more discipline than the ministry ever asked of me. She said her brother's name was Ryan, 19 at Black Pass, and he was in the tail, and the tail was the part of the plan that got treated as margin. Then she said the gaps were not there for me to be proved right about, and went to check on Pell. Pell walked out of Edda's tent that evening on his own feet, hoarse as a gate hinge, and complained that we had let the flue in the 3rd house go uninspected. Edda told him to stop talking. He kept talking. That is how I knew he was fine. Pell was back on a roof in 4 days. His part of the price was 4 days and a sore throat. Solt paid a season at least in a valley cell, while Ost's ledger did its slow work. We paid a third of our food and got a road. The road paid the next morning, and that is the only reason any of it was worth the price. 2 carts came up the quarry grade at first light, legal, sealed, and bored, carrying valley grain that had been 3 days' walk and a forbidden crossing away the week before. Oda met them with her stick and her book. She bought grain at a posted price, in daylight, from a carter who did not care who we were, and she made him wait while she counted every sack twice in front of him. Nell sat on the top rail and watched the second cart come up. She had never seen a cart on that road. For Nell, that made the road real. She asked Leja whether carts came every day now, and Leja said they came when someone paid them, which is the most honest description of infrastructure I have ever heard. I was still adding the column when the second rider came in, and he had no interest in our fire at all. He was from Crane's contract office. Clean boots. He had left before the smoke, which meant the paper in his hand had been written before anyone struck a match. The quarry road was now a recognized royal contract road. Ashbank sat on it. A settlement on a royal contract road sits inside the contract system, and the contract system has schedules. Royal labor tax, assessed per adult. Royal food tax, assessed on stored provision and on any provision received as donation, gift, or charity. He read that last one twice because he was a professional and he knew which line was the knife. Gifted sheds were plainly inside the rider. Sedgeford wages were not, so Crane reclassified in-kind earnings as received provision and dared hungry laborers to contest it at a distant bench. Every sack carried home was claimed retroactive to the road opening that day. Solt came to take 40 adults with a bet, lost, and was arrested, and none of it mattered. He was the loud half. While 100 families stood in a burning camp watching a clerk read a crate mark, Alric Crane had been filing paper in a warm office 3 days' ride away. The writer asked who held authority at Ashbank so he could serve the assessment. 100 families looked at each other. Nobody answered, because nobody had ever assigned that authority, and until that afternoon, we had not needed to. Their silence gave Crane one final advantage for nothing. The Boers came through the root plots at dawn, and the army arrived before we had finished counting what was left. That timing was not a coincidence, though it took me most of the day to work out that it also was not a plan. Vorn Hale had been riding for 3 days toward a camp he expected to find on its knees, and the boars had made him look prophetic. 6 of them. Big, unbothered, working the shelf like they had a claim registered on it. The root plots were 4 weeks of Oda's life. Every seed that survived Solt's fire had gone into that ground, counted out of her memory because the ledger was pulp at the bottom of the river. She had walked 100 doors with a candle to rebuild the list, and the boars ate the list. Not all of it. 2/3 of 2 plots, which in Oda's book was 31 days of spring. She stood at the fence line at first light with a stick in her hand and stayed silent for a long while. Then the wagons came up the new road, and the new road was legal now, so we could not even stop them. 4 ration wagons, canvas tight, escorted by 12 soldiers who looked embarrassed to be there. Vorn Hale rode at the front with a folding table strapped behind his saddle, which told me everything about how this valley conducted its business. He set it up on the flat. Same flat. That flat was developing a reputation. Vorn unfolded his papers before he looked at the people. Vorn was not Solt. He was a recruiter doing a recruiter's job, and he believed the offer was generous. He had never examined what generosity looked like from beneath the wagon, or who had written the paper he was offering. 1 month of full rations for all 100 families. 30 adults, enlisted, 5 years. He did not threaten anybody. He opened the canvas so we could see the sacks. You do not have to say a word when a hungry camp can smell the flour. Vorn stood beside his wagons with his papers squared and let the arithmetic do the recruiting, and I watched several people drift toward the tailboard without deciding to. Harndorn got closest. He was 30. He had built the lee side door with his own hands 3 weeks earlier, and he had a daughter who walks in her sleep 40 strides from a quarry edge. He stood at that tailboard with his hand flat on the wood until the flour smell reached him. Not reaching, resting. A man doing sums he had already done at night. Nobody stopped him. A speech would have been easy, and I have a gift for speeches. Leja saw him. Bram saw him. Oda saw him and kept counting her plots. Whatever Ashbank was becoming, it was not going to be a place where a man got shouted away from a decision about his own child. He walked back on his own. He told me later he had gotten as far as the number 5, which was the years, and then thought about who would be at the door when his daughter got up in the dark. Harn's hand resting on the wagon was the closest Vorn Hale came to a signature, and he never knew. When Harn stepped away, I turned to the problem I understood and nearly mistook familiarity for competence. Boars are a logistics failure. That is a real sentence I said out loud, in daylight, to a professional cook while drawing in the dirt. I had the whole answer inside 2 minutes. Perimeter trench on the exposed side, staked pit line at the 2 gaps, drive them into the quarry cut where the walls do the work for you. I had run bore drives for a garrison in the north. I sketched the trench angles. I was rather pleased with the trench angles. Oda let me finish. She has excellent manners when she is deciding how to take someone apart. Then she asked how many boars I had killed with my own hands. I said the garrison drives had taken 40 in a season. She asked the question again, with the same words, in the same tone, and I understood that the answer she wanted was the true one. None. I had signed the order for 40 boars. She said she had never met a boar that respected a ministerial diagram. Then she took my trench and used it, because Oda Rill has never wasted anything in her life, including a former minister. She used it as one line in her own operation instead of as the operation itself. The food crews chose her without a vote. Nobody proposed it. Bram's people were already looking at her when she picked up the stick. Tessa handed her the work order without being asked, and that was the entire ceremony. Oda ran it like a woman who had been running it in her head for a week. Trackers first, 3 of them, out along the seep line to find where the boars bedded. Noise crews with pans and boards on both flanks. Pit covers cut from Tessa's rejected boards, because Tessa's rejected boards have furnished half this settlement. Butchers standing by with the salt already counted. That was her rule, and she said it twice. You do not chase meat you have no plan to keep. Salt first, then spears. Child lookouts on the rim, Nell among them, with instructions to shout and not to be brave. Nell asked whether shouting counted as helping. Leja told her it was the entire job. Ket got the river cut because his ribs were still strapped and someone had to sit in a boat and bang a pot. I got the offal cart. Oda's reasoning was correct. The offal cart runs continuously from the killing ground to the pits, or the site draws every fly and rat in the valley and you lose the meat you just caught. It is unskilled, disgusting, essential, and it needs the strongest back that is not doing anything smarter. That was me. I was the strongest back not doing anything smarter. Savin Rowe laughed so hard he had to sit down on his own anvil. The drive took 4 hours, and it was the best organized operation I had seen since the Northern Army. and the Northern Army had a budget. The trackers found 6 in the gorse by the seep before the fog lifted. A girl named Sella went in on her belly to confirm the bed, while 2 grown men held the line behind her because she was the lightest, and the gorse would have announced anybody heavier. Then the noise crews closed the flanks, and I learned what a noise crew actually is. It is not shouting. Shouting scatters. It is a slow line of people making a steady, boring, unfrightening racket, walking at the speed of a bored animal, giving the boars exactly one comfortable direction to leave in. Half the skill is not being exciting. The boars went where Oda said they would go, which was not where I said they would go, because my trench assumed a boar wants to escape, and Oda knows a boar wants to go where it always goes. They ran the old pig road, the one that was there before the quarry, before the camp, before any of us. She had 3 of them in the cut in 40 minutes. 2 got out through the noise line because a pan crew was 1 person short. Oda had planned for that. She had planned for 2. She had not planned for the 6th. It came out of the gorse behind the line, which is the direction boars are not supposed to come from. And it went across the flat at the speed of a falling wall and straight through Vornhale's recruiting table. I did not arrange that. I have been accused of it since. The boar chose, and the boar was a better strategist than either of us, because it hit that table at the exact moment 3 men had their hands on the enlistment page. The table came apart. Papers went up like startled birds. Vorn ended up standing on his own ration wagon with his boots on a flour sack, shouting at a pig. It was dead 9 strides later. 2 of Oda's butchers took it in the cut with a spear and a boarding hook, which are the tools you have when you are a fishing settlement pretending to be a hunting one. Meanwhile, I was having the worst morning of my professional life. The killing ground was 40 strides uphill of the pits, on wet quarry clay, and the awful cart is a 2-wheeled thing with no brake and a bed that holds about 4 boars worth of everything nobody eats. The first run went fine. I was quietly proud of the first run. Then the wheel found the rut, the load shifted, and the cart put me flat on my back on the slope with most of its cargo distributed across my chest. Nell, from the rim, informed the entire valley that the minister had fallen over. I got up. I reloaded it by hand, which is a job you cannot do in gloves and should not do in a shirt you like. Then I discovered the second law of the awful cart, which is that a camp dog will take a lung off a moving vehicle, and there is nothing in ministerial training that covers the pursuit. I did not get the lung back. The dog was faster and better motivated. By the 3rd run, I had stopped trying to keep the cart clean and started keeping the line moving, which was the actual job. 10 runs, 4 hours. No flies on the meat, no rats in the cut, and 1 former defense minister who had to be hosed at the water barrel before Etta would let him near a patient. My contribution to the greatest provisioning operation in Ashbank Quarry was carrying the parts of the pig that nobody wanted, uphill, in the rain. It worked because I did it 10 times instead of once, and then making a speech about it. And then Oda walked over to the wreckage of the recruiting table, turned the top slab over, checked it for splinters, and had it carried to the killing ground. It was 2 inches of planed oak. She had been butchering on a door. With perfect courtesy, she asked whether Vorn intended to rebuild his table. He said no. She asked whether he objected to its new use. Before his own soldiers, he said he did not. His public surrender of the table mattered more than the boar. The moment a recruiter says out loud, in public, that the army does not need its table today, and Oda nods and turns it into a butcher block, and every soul watching understands that his furniture and his offer were made of the same wood. 4 boars. Oda's book said 14 days of meat if we cured it right, 4 days if we ate like idiots. We cured it right. The salt counters worked through the afternoon under the oak slab, and I have never seen anything so unglamorous done so well. Weighing, rubbing, counting. A woman named Ista, who 3 weeks ago had moved a window twice, ran the salt tally and refused 2 crews their allocation because their cuts were not trimmed to her standard. They trimmed them again. She was right. The first cut went across the river to the Sedgeford sheds under the Fenn household's roof, with Ashbank hands paid at the posted rate. Same loop, still turning. Morrow Fenn sent a boy back with a message saying his racks were built for fish, and he would be lodging a complaint about the smell. The smokehouses were the new thing, and they were where I became useful again. Tessa designed 3 against the north face where the draft runs steady. Stone base, brick throat, hung racks, a door that seals. Pell built the flues and inspected them twice and told everyone within earshot that he had personally vented worse. I dug, carried, pinned, and hung the doors. Then the work groups accepted them. 1 smokehouse to each group, and I retained no claim, key, or future control over what hung inside. Each smokehouse triggered the return. Stone, brick, iron, timber, hung rack irons, and seal plates came back because they were fixed and required for the building's declared job. No meat, not 1 strip. A boy asked why a smokehouse full of meat would not return the meat. Oda answered before I could, which was correct, because by then it was her question to answer. She said the building comes back because the minister gave the building away. The meat came back because 40 people ran at a pig. That went around the camp faster than anything I have ever said. Vorn stayed 2 days, and the second day is when it turned. Oda posted the reserve, the actual count, on a board, in her own hand, where any family could read it. 8 days of stores, plus 14 of cured meat, plus the wage line, plus the carts. Not comfortable, not starving. That board did more damage to Vorn Hale than the boar did. His entire offer priced hunger, and Oda had put the price of hunger in public where he could not adjust it. Then she fed his soldiers, full portions, the same as ours, at our fire, with no papers anywhere near the food. 12 men who had spent 3 days escorting flour they were forbidden to eat sat down in a refugee camp and were given dinner by the people they had come to recruit. She did not do it as a gesture. I asked her. She said hungry soldiers make bad decisions around wagons, and she would rather feed them once than guard the store all night. The soldiers talked, because men talk when they are fed. A corporal with a bad shoulder asked whether we had heard about the donation clause. We had not. He assumed we had because it was in the standing orders read to him before he rode out. Any provision received as donation, gift, or charity is assessable as royal debt at the receiving settlement. Vorn's generous month of rations, handed over free, would have arrived as a debt. 1 month of food, and a bill for 1 month of food, assessed against a settlement with no authority to receive it and no way to pay it. The 30 enlistments were never the price. They were the deposit. I sat with that a moment and felt the shape of Alric Crane in it, 3 days away, in a warm office. Leja made him read it aloud. She did not shout. She walked onto the flat with the corporal's words in her mouth and asked Vorn Hale, before all 100 families and 12 soldiers, to read the fine print on his own paper. He tried to summarize. She said, read it. He read it. All of it. The enlistment term. The transfer clause that let the Crown move a recruit service to any contract holder, which meant 30 Ashbank adults could be signed to the Army and delivered to Crane's road crews inside a month. And the donation schedule that turned his 4 wagons into a lien. Bram Say made him read the transfer clause a 3rd time. Bram had spent 12 years around camps built out of exactly that sentence. He knew what a transferred man looks like coming back. He asked Vorn, flatly, whether the recruit gets told where he has been transferred to, and Vorn checked the page and said the clause did not require it. Bram answered by refusing to build Ashbank a militia. Anything with 1 list of names and 1 man at the top could be transferred whole, whether that man was a commissioner, a minister, or a friend. He was looking at me when he said the last part. He was not being cruel. He was being accurate. Vorn Hale was not a liar. That was his problem. He had never read the back of his own page, because nobody ever asks a recruiter to. And when he reached the transfer clause, his voice did the thing a voice does when a man learns something in public. He stopped. He went back and read the clause again, to himself, with his finger on it. Nobody signed, not 1 adult from the 100 households. He offered the rations anyway at the end, without the papers, and I believe he meant it. Oda refused, and refused kindly because she had the schedule in front of her now and knew exactly what a gift cost. He left with his claim intact, his wagons full, and his table in our butchery. That evening, Oda called the Food Council into being with about 9 words, 7 seats drawn from the work groups, rotating every 20th day, holding the stores, the posted prices, the wage rate, and the reserve count. Not one of those seats was mine. She did not offer, I did not ask, and the ease of that should have bothered me more. Harndorn copied Oda's reserve board for every sleeping row, so no recruiter could own the numbers again. She said the boars would return next spring. By then, she wanted a fence, 3 trained crews, and a settlement that did not need a former minister to carry the offal. I said I was good at the offal. She said that was the trouble with men like me. We are always good at something, and it is never the thing that needs doing. The council's first act was to answer Crane's rider, who was still waiting, still being fed, still asking who held authority at Ashbank. Their answer was that no one person did. Here were 7 names. He would have to serve all of them. He wrote it down. He wrote out. And I watched him go and understood that we had handed Alric Crane the first clean look at how Ashbank makes decisions, and that a man who studies dependencies now had a list of 7. On the 31st day, the Mainwell grew teeth. That is what Nell called it, and I have never found a better description. A crust had come up overnight between the stones of the wellhead, pale blue, fine as frost, growing in the wet seams where the rope had worn the lip. By mid-morning, 9 people could not keep water down. By noon, it was 22. By dusk, Pelcor was on his back in Edda's tent, with his knees drawn up, gray as the slate he works on, still conscious and still talking, which in Pel's case is the same as a pulse. Pel drank more than anyone in this settlement. He is a mason. He spends his days inside a cloud of his own dust, and he had been going back to that well a dozen times a day since the fire. Within 2 hours, Etta established the first reliable fact. The people who drank most were the sickest. She closed the well before explaining her suspicion, choosing a reversible inconvenience over another poisoned cup. Etta then closed the 100 family's only water source on her own authority, with no vote, no counsel, and no consultation, while the reason was still a guess. I did not overrule her. I did not argue. Etta was 58 and her rule was simple. A well can reopen tomorrow. A child cannot. She did not need my permission, and I knew it. I asked what she needed. She said a list. So I made the list, because that is the one thing I am actually good at. Etta needed names, water sources, times, and amounts. 100 families, 4 sources, 3 days back. I walked it door to door with a wax board and Oda's rebuilt seed ledger as a template, because Oda had already proved you can reconstruct 100 households from memory if you are stubborn and rude. It took a day and a half, and it gave us one thing, and the one thing turned the whole week around. The sick were not spread evenly around the well. They were stacked at the top of the cut. The high crews, the ones cutting the new house terraces above the shelf, were sick first and sickest. Families who lived 40 strides from the wellhead and drank from it all day were fine. The pattern was backwards. Water runs downhill. If a well is bad, the people at the well get it first and worst, unless the well was never the delivery. I did not know what the pattern meant. I handed it to Etta because the cases pointed uphill instead of down. Everything after that came from other people's observations. Tessa took the ground. She had the drainage isolated before I finished the second row of my list, which is a thing I only understood the value of later. She cut the runoff channels above the wellhead and turned them out to the gorse, so that whatever was arriving stopped arriving while we argued about what it was. She did not know the cause either. She simply refused to let the site keep receiving deliveries. Then the rumor started, and the rumor was faster than any of us. Somebody said the water had been poisoned by people from across the pass, the Draven side. Yara Dren's families at Dren Bank were 40 miles away, no more than a name heard from a boatman, and none had ever approached our road. They had not arrived. They had not been near us. Not one of them had ever set foot on this shelf. That did not slow it down for a heartbeat. By the second evening, there were 10 men at the south track with tools in their hands and a plan they were calling a patrol. Bram would not touch it. His cells are voluntary and he would not whistle for that, which is exactly why his system is worth having. Leja Tomasin stopped it. She walked down to the south track and faced 10 armed neighbors. She did not appeal to anybody's better nature, because she does not believe in it, and neither do I. She asked them to show her the road. That was all. She asked how the poison got here. Which track? Which cart? Which hands? Which hours? 40 miles, through a military boundary, past Bram's Rim lookouts, past the ferry rotation, to salt a well in a camp nobody has ever heard of, without one person seeing one wheel. She said that for 3 years she had kept the list of what happens when people decide who is guilty before they know how it was done. She had 140 names on it and would not add another over a bucket. She got the 10 men to hand her the road they had invented, one piece at a time, and it fell apart in her hands in front of them. They went home, not convinced, ashamed, which works faster. The woman who built my gallows is the reason no one else got hanged that week. She did it with the same instrument she uses on me, a demand for the physical path. The physical path arrived the next morning, carried by children. Bram's Rim lookouts are mostly 9 and 10 years old, because Bram believes a child who is trusted with a real job will do it better than an adult who is bored. 2 of them came in to report blue on the wheel rims of the water carts. Not on the carts, on the ruts. A pale film in the tracks up on the high road above the quarry, where nothing had any business being. Nell brought the other half. There is a sealed bucket left out at the top of the cut for the work crews, filled fresh each morning, so nobody has to walk down. She had smelled something bitter on the seal wax 2 days earlier and had not said anything because she had been told the water was fine and she is 8 and adults are usually right. She said it out loud this time, and Etta took the bucket apart on the spot. The bitter smell was on the wax, which meant it had been on the hands of whoever sealed it, which meant it had not come out of the ground. A child gave us the answer because she remembered a smell, and nobody told her to be quiet twice. After that it was tracking, and tracking is arithmetic. I measured the ruts. The wheel width on the high road was wrong for our carts, wrong for sedge Fords, and wrong for the valley grain carts that had been coming up the new legal road since the wager. Narrower. A trade cart, not a farm cart. Tessa found where it stopped. An abandoned lime shed on the high shelf, roofless, 40 years dead, sitting directly above the seam that feeds our well. Getting into it nearly cost us more than the water did. 4 men wanted to go straight through the doorway. Tessa put her arm across it and told them the lintel had been carrying a wall with no roof to brace it since before any of them were born. One of them told her we did not have time for this. He was no fool. He was frightened because his sister was one of the 22 and could not keep water down. She did not argue. She picked up a stone and threw it at the lintel. The lintel came down. It took the doorway and 4 feet of wall with it, and the noise went around the quarry twice. Then she showed them the north gable, where the wall was tied into rock. It cost us an hour, and it cost nobody anything else. They had not put anything in the well. That would have been visible and stupid and a hanging matter if anyone caught them at it. They had cracked open a lime shed's floor drain and let it feed the seam, and then topped the work crew's sealed bucket to speed it along for the people who drank the most. Inside the shed were 9 casks. Legal ones, sealed, stamped, and documented, which is the part that took my breath. Blue dye. Copper base, the sort that colors a guild cloth and kills a man slowly if he drinks a well full of it. A registered consignment with a route slip, moving under a lawful transport writ. Ed approved it before she would let anyone say it out loud. She took a scraping of the crust off the well lip, a pinch of the cask powder, and 2 cups of clean river water, and she sat at the clinic bench in front of Oda, Bram, and the 4 loudest men in the camp and made the teeth grow again on a piece of quarry stone. Same color, same fine crystal in the wet seam. She let it dry and let them touch it. The witnesses stopped arguing. Then she said the sentence that ended the argument for good, which was that she now knew what was in the water, what it does, and roughly how much of it a body could take, and that until she said otherwise, nobody drank anything she had not tested with her own hands. Nobody argued. The 4 loudest men in the camp carried barrels for her for the next 4 days. The route slip had been amended. The consignment was booked from the valley to a cloth house 60 miles south, and somebody had endorsed it through a tax office for reassessment, a document that lets cargo detour and sit somewhere for 10 days without anyone asking why. The endorsement carried a contract office stamp, and underneath it, on the cask lids, were broker marks. Farron Ost had read one of those marks aloud over a burning storehouse 3 weeks before. Etta ran the sick end of it while we ran the dirt. She had a triage rule and she published it, which is not something people do. The worst first, then the ones who could still walk, then the ones who were frightened, and she said out loud that being frightened was a real condition, and she would treat it third, rather than pretend it did not exist. She would not let anyone drink until she had a source she had tested herself. That meant hauling from the river up the quarry path by hand in barrels for 4 days. It is 400 strides of wet rock from the landing to the shelf, and a full barrel weighs more than the woman carrying it. We moved every drop for 100 families that way, twice a day in the rain, and Ket's rotation ran the crossing from dark to dark to keep the barrels coming. Harndorn's daughter was one of the 22. She was 6 days on Etta's floor and she came back, and Harn carried barrels for the whole 4 days without once being asked and without once going home to sleep. A month earlier, the same man had stood at an army tailboard doing sums about her. Nobody at Ashbank ever brought it up. The settlement had already decided something about itself and had not bothered to tell me. And she was right, because on the second day, somebody found a spring seep on the north face and wanted to open it immediately. And Etta made them wait half a day while she ran it through cloth, boiled it, tasted it herself, and watched her own hands. She tested it on herself. I asked her about that afterward, more sharply than I meant to. She said she was 58, had no children, and could decide what happened to her own body. Then she asked if I had any other questions about her authority. I did not. Tessa built the answer while Etta held the line. A bypass line off the north seep, above the lime shed, out of the contaminated seam entirely. Timber cribbing, stone channel, clay pipe on supports, a settling box, and a wash house at the bottom so that people stopped washing in what they drank, which Etta said had been killing us slowly since the day we arrived and would have kept doing it without any help from Crane. And a clinic. A real one. Stone floor, a door that seals, a flue, and windows that open, because Etta had been running a valley's worth of medicine out of a tent since the day the Crown dropped us here. I dug, carried, cut pipe seats, and hung the doors. The work groups accepted the wash house. Etta accepted the clinic, personally, in front of everyone, with the whole ridiculous formula spoken out loud, because I was not going to leave one crack in it. The returned materials appeared beside the clinic. Pipe supports, stone, tile, clay pipe in matched lengths, the settling box fittings, and the hung door irons and the flue plates, because they are fixed and required. No medicine, no clean water, not one drop. The water came out of that pipe because 40 people had dug a channel across a rock face for 6 days. The medicine came out of Eda's own stores and out of a valley apothecary that Oda paid at a posted price from the meat money. I have stopped finding that funny. It is simply the shape of the thing. The rule builds the box. It has never once filled it. Solt Vey came back to us in a cart on the 5th day, in irons, at his own request. He had petitioned Farron Ost's bench to be moved out of the valley cell and into the custody of the settlement he had tried to burn. His argument, written in his own hand, was that Ashbank had 100 witnesses and no reason to want him quiet. He was afraid of Crane. He never said the name in the petition. He did not have to. A man does not ask to be jailed by his own victims unless the alternative is worse, and Solt had spent 3 weeks in a cell that Crane's office could reach. The council took him, not out of mercy. Oda put it in one line, which was that a witness who is frightened of your enemy is the most valuable object you will ever own. He gave us the well in exchange for the walls around him. He had not laid the die himself. He had been in a cell. He knew the order's shape because he had brokered its first half before the fire and already wondered why cloth dye needed a 10-day hold above a refugee camp. Crane had not been trying to kill us. Killing 100 families puts hundreds of names on a death roll and brings a bench inquiry with a circuit clerk and a ledger. He had been trying to make us panic. A camp with a poisoned well breaks in a specific direction. People run. People hide what matters to them. People dig up the thing they have buried and carry it out in their coat. And if you have men on the road watching who leaves and what they are holding, you do not need to search a single tent. He was fishing. And the fish had a name. Solt said Crane had been looking for a Black Pass transport ledger for 3 years because somewhere in the wreck of that retreat, a record survived that showed 12 usable wagons booked to a private silver cargo on the night the gate closed. Then he told me where my seal was. After the crown stripped me, my ministerial seal should have gone to the vault and been defaced. It went to the contract office for assessment instead, and Solt had seen it in Crane's drawer the previous year with the die intact. Crane does not destroy a thing that can still make a mark. I set the warning aside because clean water came first. Even so, Solt had just told me exactly where a live seal bearing my name had sat for 3 years. I had signed the order believing those wagons were broken. The manifest said broken. Crane wrote the manifest, none of which makes me innocent, and I said so before anyone had to say it to me. The wagons being real means Crane is a thief. My name on the gate order means what it has always meant. Leja was standing at the back of the clinic when he said the word ledger. She waited until Solt was gone. Then she waited until Eda's tent was empty. Then she came and found me and Tessa at the settling box, and she took a strip of leather out of her coat. And I understood that she had been carrying it since the day she read my charges under a noose. It was a cover strip, torn, a manifest binding, with a wagon numbering pattern stamped along the spine and a burn line across one corner. Thomas had known. Her husband came out of the Black Pass Customs house with the record, tore the marked cover strip free, and pressed it into Leja's coat. He carried the pages back through the customs door before returning to hold the approach. She never saw where he left them. A man who knows what a full ledger is worth does not carry all of it into a fight. She had the cover, not the pages. For 3 years she had not known whether Thomas hid them, burned them, or died with them in his shirt. She had not told anyone. Not Oda, not Bram, not the assembly. Because for 3 years the only person who could read that strip and understand what it proved was the man she was going to hang. I asked her why she was telling me now. She said because Crane had put copper in her daughter's water to find it, and she was done being the reason it stayed lost. She also said in the same breath, without changing her voice, that this was not forgiveness, and I should not spend it as if it were. I said I knew. Pell walked out of the new clinic on the 9th day on his own feet, thinner, grayer, and deeply aggrieved. Not about the copper, about the soup. Eda had been feeding the sick on Oda's boar broth, and by the time Pell's stomach came back, the good pot was finished, and he wanted it entered somewhere official that he had been poisoned and then denied the broth. He inspected the clinic flue on his way out and pronounced it acceptable, which from Pell is a state honor. He was laying stone again inside the week. 34 homes stood on the shelf by then. The pipe ran, the wash house worked, and nobody had drunk from that well since the morning Nell named its teeth. We had clean water, a clinic, a witness in irons, and the first physical piece of the thing that could break out at Crane. Crane learned only that the well operation had failed. Solt was alive in Ashbank custody, and no frightened witness had carried a record onto the watched roads. He did not know Leja held the cover or which shelter protected it. The uncertainty was enough to raid records, tools, and witnesses without knowing which household mattered. Bram Say built Ashbank's defense out of things a man cannot steal, and the first thing he refused to build was a list. He had started 6 weeks before the raid, Every instinct I had would have built his system differently and worse. No roster, no company, no captain, no muster point. 10 cells, formed by whoever wanted in, each 4 to 9 people who already worked together. The fish crews were a cell. The salt counters were a cell. They chose their own, which meant nobody joined out of shame. Each cell had one whistle and one job, not a battle plan, a job, children, clinic, records, stores, water, lamps. The whistles were the part I could not stop turning over. Each cell's call was different, and no call meant everybody. There was no signal in that entire settlement that could put 100 families in one place at one time. Bram had built that on purpose. He said a camp that can all be called to one spot is a camp that can be emptied from one spot, and he had watched it done twice. The keys rotated every 8th day by lot, the same as the ferry. Records room, store, clinic cabinet, tool chest, lamp oil. 5 keys, 5 different households, redrawn every 8th day, and no one person ever held 2. I asked him once, what happens if a cell makes the wrong call? He said then one cell is wrong instead of the whole settlement. I asked whether he wanted a signal that reached me. He said no. He said it kindly, which somehow made it worse, and then he explained it in a way I have carried ever since. He said my orders are usually good, and that is the trouble. A settlement that learns to wait for a good order stops making its own, and one day the man giving them is on the wrong hill or in a cell or dead, and everybody stands still with their hands open. I called it a brutal way to run a settlement. He said the first season would be brutal, but the next 20 would belong to the people living there. Then he gave me a roll anyway, posted on the board where anyone could read it. North approach, alone, seal it, and hold it. The job for a man who is strong, knows ground, and can be spared. I had been assigned the least important gate in Ashbank by a former camp guard, in writing, and I put my name against it because refusing would have proved his point. The raid came on the 50th day, and it came in 2 halves, and the first half was addressed to me by name. A messenger rode up the quarry road at dusk with a tax demand. Wax seal, contract office format, correct schedule references, and one line that put its hook straight through my ribs. The Crown required Ashbank to produce, for assessment, any transport records held by the settlement or its residents relating to the Black Pass retreat. 9 days after Leja put a torn cover strip into my hand, a broad demand arrived for every Black Pass transport record. It did not prove Crane knew about her strip. It proved he was widening the search, and I reacted as though he had named it. I read it 3 times, then walked it to Leia and Tessa, the only other people who knew what was in Leja's coat. Solt, in irons, knew only that some part of the transport record had survived. We took it to the north gate to meet the messenger, all 3 of us, because I wanted to see his hands and his horse and his seal in daylight, and I wanted the 2 people who knew about the strip standing where I could see them. I completed the trap myself. The messenger was genuine, and I still worry at that detail. A contract writer carrying a properly filed demand with no idea how Crane meant to use his delay. No forged seal warned us away. Crane had sent a true thing at a chosen hour, which is harder to catch and much more expensive. He arrived at dusk, and he was slow. He wanted the demand read back to him. He wanted a name for the receipt, and the Food Council had 7 names, and he insisted on writing all 7 down with correct spellings. By the time I understood what I was looking at, daylight had failed, and I was 600 strides from the records room with the 2 other people who knew. Lecha worked it out 1 breath before I did. She stood still with the demand, reading the line that covered the thing in her coat, along with every other transport record. It had arrived at dusk, and the rider was taking his time. She said the word bait and was already moving. Tessa caught her arm at the gatepost, and Leja hit her. Open-handed, hard, no heat in it at all, the way you swat something out of your path when your daughter is on the far side of a settlement in the dark. Tessa did not let go. She said the cut and pointed. Their difference became physical at the gate. Leja was ready to run down the main path through whatever waited there. Tessa had already searched the terrain for a route the attackers would not be watching. Tessa had already found the drainage line behind the terraces because Tessa has never once gone anywhere the obvious way. Then the whistles started behind us, and they were not my whistles, because I did not have any. Crane's men came up the old drainage cut on the quarry's blind side, 12 of them. Not soldiers, not a war band. Men in ordinary coats with tools and a sketch, moving fast toward 1 small stone room and 1 prisoner. They had been told to expect a camp that would freeze and wait for the minister. Every report Crane had ever bought said the same thing. Ashbank does what Darien Vale says. The road wager, the ferry rescue, the well, the boars, the miracle in the mud, all of it filed under 1 name because a contract office understands 1 name and cannot price a rotation. He had costed us at 1 node. He sent 12 men to take a node. They walked into a settlement where nobody was waiting for anything. The lamp cell lit first. It was Bram's cleverest piece and barely a weapon. 10 oil lamps on 10 posts around the shelf, lit by whoever was nearest. No order needed, and the moment they burned, every face in Ashbank was visible. That does nothing to a soldier. It is devastating to a man in an ordinary coat pretending to belong. The children's cell had the young ones off the shelf and into the North Terraces inside 2 minutes, by a route they had walked every afternoon for 2 weeks. The record cell blocked the stair. It was 6 people. A stair, a door, and 6 people from the salt line with hand tools and a bar. And they held it because Tessa had put one turn into that stair during the first housing push. The turn allowed only one attacker onto the landing at a time. Ista was on that stair, the woman who moved her window twice. She took a cut across the forearm that Etta closed with 4 stitches, and she did not move off the step, and the raiders did not get past the turn. The clinic cell put itself around Etta's door and simply stood there. 9 people, no weapons, in the light of their own lamps, in front of a building with sick children in it. The raiders did not test that one. 12 men in ordinary coats will break a door. They will not walk into 9 lit faces that know what they look like. 4 of them went for Salt. We had him in the old quarry office with a hearth and a bar on the outside of the door, which is the closest thing to a cell 100 refugees could build. 2 households on the rotation held that key. The men who came for him were not carrying rope. Ket Arlo saw the first one over the sill and shouted the one thing that mattered, which was that the man had a knife out before the door was open. Nobody at Ashbank has ever loved Solt Vey. He burned our winter. Ista's forearm has stitches in it because of the night he set up, and Pell's throat still sounds like a hinge. 6 people from the store cell put themselves between that door and 4 armed men anyway. Cat was one of them, with his ribs still strapped, holding a boat hook. He had been bought by Solt Vey 8 weeks earlier and had almost drowned for it, and he stood in the doorway of Solt's cell and would not move. Afterward, I asked him why. He said he had sold this settlement one route already, and he was not going to sell it a witness. They did not get through. The lamp cell lit the ground behind them, and 4 men in ordinary coats found themselves in bright light in front of 30 people who had watched them try. They went back down the cut. Solt sat on his hearth all night with his back to the wall and spoke to nobody. In the morning he asked, in a voice I had not heard him use, whether the men had been sent for the box or for him. Both, obviously. Crane does not spend a night raid on one errand. From that morning, Solt Vey stopped negotiating and began cooperating. Mercy had not changed him. His employer sent knives to close the only mouth that could name him, while the settlement he had tried to starve defended his door. And I was on the north approach, 600 strides away, listening to a settlement fight in the dark. I replayed that minute after the seal night later that winter. I could hear the whistles. I could not read them. They were not mine to read. I knew there were 10 cells, and I knew none of the calls, and I had 100 families worth of instinct screaming at me to run down that hill and start telling people what to do. The dangerous truth was that I would have been good at it. I could have reached the shelf, read the ground, and issued a dozen correct orders inside a minute, making every moving cell stop to listen. And every one of those orders would have arrived after the cells had already moved, and would have stopped them moving while they listened to me. So I sealed the north approach and held it, because that was the job on the board with my name against it. I dropped the gate timbers, wedged the cut, and stood in the dark, being the least important man in Ashbank, while other people saved my witness. 2 raiders came up my approach. They found a gate that was already shut and one very large former minister with a hammer who had been waiting 10 minutes and was in a poor frame of mind. They went back the way they came at speed. My part in the defense was smaller. I shut a gate that nobody needed and frightened 2 men who were leaving anyway. Ashbank saved the registry, Solt Vey, and every child on that shelf without one order from the man who used to move armies. Bram's system did not care that I was on the wrong hill, because it had been built by a man who assumed I would be. We lost the tool chest. Crane found the weakness Bram already feared. The master tool chest and road stamp box remained in one shed behind one lock. Distributed people protected the city, but concentrated equipment offered a single profitable target. Every saw, chisel, plane, square, and auger. Bought with meat money and Sedgeford wages, and they were what let 90 families put up 34 houses in 6 weeks. The material is free. The tools never were, and the rule has never once given us one. And the road stamps. The certification dies. Farinost's bench had issued to the settlement when the road opened, so Ashbank could mark its own works and its own carts as lawful. 1 shed, 1 lock, 1 key on the rotation. The raiders went in through the roof while 6 people were holding a stair 100 strides away, and they were on the drainage cut with both boxes before the lamp cell had finished lighting. Bram said it out loud at dawn, standing in the empty shed, before anybody could pretend otherwise. He said the defense worked because no one waited for Darian. He said the loss happened because the tools were still in one building behind one lock, and he had been meaning to split them across 4 sheds since the fire and had not done it, and that was his failure and nobody else's. Then he went and got a saw from the smith's hut and started cutting shelves for 4 sheds at dawn without sleeping, which is how Bram Say apologizes. Nobody died. Nobody was taken. Ista has a scar, and the stair has a notch in it that she will not let anyone plane out. We caught one of them. He went into the drainage cut in the dark. The cut has a step in it that everyone at Ashbank knows about. He did not. He broke his ankle on it. Bram's water cell found him at midnight, sitting in 6 inches of runoff and being extremely honest about his employer. He was a hired man. He knew a name, and the name was a broker 3 removes from anybody, and he had no idea what was in either box. But he had a cord on his wrist, braided, faded. 4 colors. The sort a frontier unit issues to its own, so the sentries know a man in the dark. I knew that pattern. I had signed the requisition for 1,200 of them. It was Cassian Severin's, 4th Frontier, and the pattern had been out of issue for 6 years. I stood in the dark, holding a raider's wrist, and felt the shape of a very old, very clean trick. Because there are 2 things that cord can mean. Either the general who warned me at Black Pass is buying men to rob refugees, or somebody bought a 6-year-old cord from a 6-year-old surplus, tied it on a hired man he expected to lose, and paid for the sentence I was about to say out loud in front of 100 angry families. I kept it behind my teeth. I gave the cord to Farinost's record and told only Bram and the council, and half of them decided I was protecting a fellow officer, and I have no way to prove otherwise even now. Severin came 4 days later, and he came up the main road in daylight with 40 riders and his own colors flying, which is not what a man does when he has something to hide. He did not deny the raid. He did something worse. He said he had heard about it, that he had investigated it, that his quartermaster's surplus rolls were a disgrace, and he would be flogging somebody over the cord, and that none of that changed his position by 1 inch. Then he stood on the flat where our gallows used to be, and made the one argument I could never break because every fact he named had already happened in front of us. He said Ashbank had now had a bought ferry, an arson, a poisoning, and a night raid in 50 days. 100 families beside a military supply road, with no garrison, no charter, no recognized authority, and nobody who could be held responsible. He said an unregistered settlement beside a military road is a hole in a frontier, and holes get filled by whoever arrives first. He was not wrong, which made the threat harder to dismiss. Every single thing he listed had happened because we possessed nothing anybody in the capital recognized as a name. His offer was simple: a royal garrison, his men on our gates, our rotations dissolved into his watch schedule, our keys into his quartermaster's hands. In exchange, recognition, protection, and legal standing. Oda asked who would hold the stores. Severin said his quartermaster would hold the stores. Bram did not say anything at all, and that was the loudest thing on that flat. Leja asked him one question, and it was the only moment that afternoon when the general had to stop and think. She asked what happens to a garrison's protection when the garrison is ordered somewhere else. He said that was a matter for the Frontier Command. She said she knew. Her husband had been protected by a Frontier Command at a place called Black Pass for about 4 hours, and then the command had a timetable and the protection went up the road with it. She was standing here because the protection had been a schedule the whole time, and nobody told the people relying on it. Severin did not answer that. To his credit, he did not try. He looked at her for a while, and then said that he had warned the minister about the timing at Black Pass and had been overruled, and that he had spent 3 years deciding it was the absence of control that killed those people. Only then did he look at me and say he had been half right. The mild accusation landed harder than anything Leia had ever thrown at me, because Severin had warned me before Black Pass and still blamed the wrong absence. Severin gave us until the 100th home. He had read our decree, and he knew the Crown's own condition was 100 permanent homes in 100 days, and he told us that on the day we certified the 100th, he would come back for an answer. 50 days, 66 houses to go, no tools. That last one is worth sitting with because a return pile of timber is worthless without a saw. The rule gives us the material for a house and has never once given us the means to shape it. Savin Rowe ran the arithmetic at his forge the next morning, and it was ugly. 12 usable hand tools left in the whole settlement, most of them his own, none of them a proper frame saw. 66 houses, 50 days. He could make tools, but not tools and houses at the same time. And nothing at all without more iron than we had. Everyone in the shed reached the same answer. We needed a proper forge with a hearth and a lift, but building it would consume the scarce iron and tools it was meant to replace. Tessa started drawing it that afternoon. He wrote out having threatened nobody, insulted nobody, and lied about nothing, which is the most dangerous kind of man I have ever had to face across a table, and I have faced Alric Crane. That night I walked the shelf and counted lamps. 34 homes with keys in them, 10 cells with 10 whistles, 7 food council seats, 5 rotating keys, 4 of them now in 4 different sheds because Bram had not slept, and 1 man who had been given the north gate and had held it, and whose settlement had saved itself while he did. I was proud that the settlement had not needed me. Later, with the old seal in my hand, I treated that pride as proof that one private exception would be safe. It was not proof. The forge took 9 days to build and 11 seconds to destroy, and I was the one holding the axe. During those 9 days, Savin Rowe kept making tools without a forge. I had never watched a smith work without a smithy. It is a humiliating thing to see, and Savin let us all see it because he wanted every crew on that shelf to understand exactly what the raid had taken. He made a frame saw out of a barrel hoop, straightened it cold on a stone, cut the teeth with a file that was down to its last inch, set them by eye, and handed it to a terrace crew. It worked. It cut a house frame's worth of timber before it went dull, and then it took him 4 hours to sharpen because he had no proper hearth to soften it in. 4 hours, per saw. To do a job a real forge does in 9 minutes. He made chisels out of the raider's own crowbar, which had been left in the drainage cut by a man in a hurry. He made a plain iron out of the ferry's spare tiller pin, and Ket handed it over without being asked, which cost Ket a spare tiller pin. He did all of it on a fire pit with a hand bellows that a 9-year-old worked in shifts because nobody else had the patience. Meanwhile, the houses stopped. Free material did not make a building. Timber and cut stone lay doubled in the rain, useless as a mountain, while crews shared barrel hoop blades. You cannot joint a frame with bare hands or replace a stolen square with determination. 34 homes and 66 to go, and in the 9 days after the raid we finished two, with 100 families working and every material we needed lying on the ground. Ista's crew spent a full day on one door frame with a saw made of a barrel hoop, and at the end of it she sat down on the sill and did not say anything for a while, and Ista is not a woman who sits down. While his improvised tools kept 2 house crews moving, Savin sighted the forge above the ravine, because that is where the draft is. Cold air comes up that cut all day. A hearth with free draft reaches welding heat without 4 people on a bellows, and we did not have 4 people to spare from anything. It also meant the only flat approach was a service bridge over 60 feet of nothing. Tessa built the bridge first. 2 spans, timber, pinned to rock at both ends, with a middle trestle standing on a ledge that Savin swore at for 2 days. She tested it with 12 men and a loaded stone sled before she let a child anywhere near it. The forge consumed all 9 days, and none of them was easy. The clay throat cracked twice in firing, and Savin rebuilt it twice. The lift required a counterweight, and the counterweight required a pit, and the pit hit rock at 3 feet. So Pell spent 2 days breaking stone by hand on a hearth that did not exist yet. Every one of those days, that arithmetic sat in everybody's head. The forge was eating time before it could return iron. Twice the iron. Every strap, pin, plate, and band in that building doubled in sorted piles the day the smiths took the key, enough to replace the master chest 4 times over and put a real saw in the hands of every crew on that shelf. 9 days of everyone's life were sitting in that number. Harl and Bryn Saye carried the last piece across at mid-morning. They are Bram's brother's children, 16 and 14, apprenticed to Savin and Tessa since the week we arrived. Harl is the one who dragged Pell off a burning roof. Bryn is the one who noticed Savin's barrel hoop saw kept binding, worked out he had set the teeth even, and reset them properly herself at 14, without telling anyone until it was done. Savin had let her keep doing it. Every saw after that one was set by Bryn Saye, because she was better at it than he was, and he said so out loud in front of the cooperative. They had the tailleur assembly on a shoulder yoke between them. Copper pipe, clay throat, iron collar. The last piece. 2 hours of fitting and the hearth would light. The pin sheared when they were 9 feet from the far side. It was the middle trestle's upslope pin, a hand span of iron, holding 1 span against the rock, and it gave no warning at all. It did not bend or groan. It parted, and the downhill span went out from under 2 children like a table pulled away. Bryn went into the gap and caught the trestle crossbrace with both arms. Harl went after her, which was the wrong thing to do, and also the only thing he was ever going to do, and got a fistful of her yoke strap and a boot onto a ledge 4 inches wide. Then they were both on the ravine wall, 60 feet up, hanging off a piece of timber that was now attached to the rock at exactly 1 point. The tailleur went to the bottom. we heard it hit. Everything that followed took about 4 minutes, and I have had 3 years to think about the few seconds that decided it. Tessa was at the forge platform. She reached the ravine lip before I did, went flat on her stomach, and looked at the wreck for the time it takes to breathe twice. Then she said the thing I had been dreading since the pin let go. The brace Bryn was holding was coming off the rock. We had perhaps 6 minutes, and there was no rope in Ashbank long enough to reach that ledge from above with anything solid to tie it to. Savin said the lift. She said the lift was 3 days from working. Savin said he could rig a manual winch off the forge frame, and Tessa said yes, and then she said the second half of it, and the second half is the part this settlement still argues about at fires. The forge frame could not do both. To winch off the frame, she needed the main crossbeam standing. Tessa made the cost plain. To get a man down to those children, she needed the roof beams gone and the main post cut, because the post was the only thing on that lip heavy enough to anchor an angled brace, and an angled brace was the only way to reach a ledge 4 inches wide. She could have the forge, or she could have the geometry. Nobody said the word iron while Tessa gave the rescue orders. Everyone could see what the cut would cost. Nobody made the cost part of her decision. Savin did not name his forge. Pell did not name the days spent breaking its pit. The crews did not name their beams. They looked at me only because the unfinished structure could save the children or survive, never both. 100 families, and every one of them turned around and looked at the man who owned nothing, because the building had to be unfinished to save them and finished to pay us, and I was the only person on that shelf who could do either. Tessa did not look at me. She looked at the frame and said, "Cut the main post, drop the roof beams east," and she said it in the flat voice she uses for load paths. She was not asking. That order had been hers since before the pin sheared. It was hers in a settlement standing order that Bram Saye moved after losing an argument in public, written into a Royal Circuit clerk's record 8 weeks earlier, on a day when the only thing at stake was some empty ground between 8 houses. So I cut it. I did not calculate. I have gone back over that minute more times than I have gone over Black Pass, looking for the place where I weighed the iron, and it is not there. There is a woman saying, "Cut the main post," and there is me with an axe. 3 cuts on the post, 1 on the east tie, Pell and 2 masons hauling the roof beams over with hooks. 9 days of work went into the ravine, and the frame came down exactly where Tessa said it would, which is the only reason anybody is alive. The main post fell across the lip and jammed against the rock's shoulder. The 2 roof beams went over it at an angle and hung up on the trestle wreck. When the frame stopped moving, we had a ramp. Ugly, unplanned, and pointing at a ledge 4 inches wide. Savin got his winch anyway, off the fallen post instead of the standing frame, with a barrel hoop, a boat block out of Ket's ferry, and about 90 feet of rope. He rigged it in under 2 minutes with both arms, and he did it while lying down, because there was nowhere to stand. Ket was on the river before anyone told him to be. He had the pole boat under the ravine inside 3 minutes, with 2 of the rotation on the poles, holding station in white water under 2 children. If Bryn came off that brace, the only thing between her and the rocks was a ferryman who had already been bought once and did not intend to be worth buying again. Etta came up the hill with 2 boards and a strap and set her station at the lip before we had anybody off the wall. She did that without being asked and without saying a word to anyone. And when I looked at her, she was already tying the second board. Etta had chosen where the injured would land before anyone reached her boards. Her work begins before the patient arrives. Bram cleared every other child from the shelf, so fear and grief would not become another load on the rescue. His cells had every child in Ashbank away from that ravine inside 4 minutes, because a man does not want an audience of 9-year-olds if this goes wrong, and Bram Say thinks about things like that while the rest of us are looking at a rope. I went down the ramp. That was my job, and it was the correct job, because I am the heaviest thing we had. The brace needed weight on the high end, and someone had to be at the bottom of it with 2 hands free. It is not a heroic memory. I went down a broken roof beam on my backside, 60 feet over a river, with Savin's hoop and block winch taking my weight through a rope that had been holding a ferry that morning. Bryn came up first. She had been holding a cross brace for 4 minutes at 14 years old, and her arms had stopped working. She would not let go of Harl's yoke strap, so we brought them up together, which took twice as long and was not negotiable, and I stopped arguing about it after the first try. Harl's boot came off the ledge twice. The second time, Savin's winch took the full weight of both of them for about 6 seconds, and that barrel hoop held. I have never seen a man look at his own work with less affection than Savin Rowe looked at that hoop. They came over the lip at dusk. Bryn had a dislocated shoulder that Etta put back on the spot, on the board she had laid out before anybody needed them. Harl had nothing at all except a boot he never found. Nell was on the terrace above when they came up because Bram's cells had every child off that shelf, and Nell had gone exactly where she was told and then climbed something so she could still see. She asked me afterward whether the forge was dead. I told her we could build another. She said then it was not dead, only late, and went to find Bryn. 8 years old, and she had understood the accounting faster than the men standing at the lip with their hands on their heads. A building is not dead. It is late. What is dead stays dead, and we had spent less than 2 months in that quarry learning the difference. No materials returned. The forge was never finished. The loss was exact. 9 days, 30 saws worth of iron, the quarry lift, and our fastest road out of the tool famine lay at the bottom of a ravine. The ground returned nothing because an unfinished forge was not a building. The rule's indifference to cost was its first honest quality. It returned nothing for intention, sacrifice, or grief. Bram sat beside Harl and Bryn at the clinic that night and did not speak to me for 2 days. When he finally did, it was to point out that his brother's children were alive because a woman gave an order and a man obeyed before the brace tore free. If we had held a vote, they would be dead. Then he said that was an argument for standing orders, and not an argument for me, and that I should be careful which one I carried home. Sabin found it the next morning. He had gone down to the ravine floor at first light to recover the tiare, because Sabin Row does not leave copper in a river, and he came back up with the sheared pin in his fist and his face the color of the sky. The break was old. A fine saw had gone 2/3 through the pin beneath its fixed collar, where no exposed surface showed it, and the cut had been packed with grease and grit. It had been in the trestle since the day it went up. Tessa's straight-loaded sled test compressed the pin against its intact lower face. The moving shoulder yoke arrived off-center when Bryn stepped onto the higher board, twisted the joint, and opened the hidden cut. Crane had not chosen 2 children. He had planted a failure for the next uneven moving load and let us choose who carried it. And on the head of the pin was a stamp. Ashbank's own road mark, one of the certification dies out of the box that walked out of our tool shed on the night of the raid. Our stamp, on our pin, in our bridge. The stamped substitute had been left among salvaged iron during the raid and entered the checked stock bin as our crews inventoried what remained. Tessa inspected the bridge 4 times and load tested it. She did not dismantle every fixed collar after accepting iron marked as our own. Crane used the stolen mark to enter our inspection chain, then hid the cut where ordinary inspection could not see it. Farron Ost took the pin into the record. Solt studied it through the bars of the quarry office before explaining why the dies had been taken. He said the road dies had never been about roads. A certification die means you can mark anything as checked. He said Crane had not stolen our tools. He had stolen our word. Then he asked, without being asked, whether we had checked the other bridge. We had not. There was a second trestle on the quarry lift approach with 4 pins in it, and Bryn Say pulled all 4 with her arms still strapped across her chest. 3 were sound. 1 had grease in it. We rebuilt the forge. The apprentices insisted, which is a mild way of saying that Bryn came out of Edda's clinic at 14 years old and started sorting salvaged iron with her good hand, and after that, nobody was going to have the discussion. 11 days. Second site, off the ravine entirely, with a longer draft channel that Savin hated and admitted was better. Tessa put 4 pins in every joint that needed one. Bryn inspected every pin herself by hand, 1 at a time, and would not accept a stamp from anybody, including her own uncle. A stolen die cost more than iron. It cost the rebuild and left a 14-year-old girl checking every pin she would touch for the rest of her life. I dug, carried, cut, and hung the door. Then the Smiths took it, not Savin. The cooperative, 7 of them, both apprentices included, with a key and an agreement they wrote themselves. I read that agreement. It is 1 page in Bryn's handwriting, and it says who gets hearth time, in what order, and what happens when 2 crews need the same heat. It says apprentices get the first hour of every day because that is when the fire is cleanest. It has 7 marks at the bottom, and not one of them is mine. I transferred the building without retaining a claim, key, or future say in what came out of it. The return came. Iron in bands and straps and plates, stone, brick, the anvil bed, the hearth plates, and the lift irons, because they are fixed and required for the building to do its declared job. Twice, all of it, in sorted piles, on ground I had chosen and was standing well clear of. Savin lit it that night. Half the settlement came to watch, which I did not expect, and Oda fed all of them out on the terrace because she had decided a week earlier that this was going to be a night and had been holding back salt meat for it. The draft took hold. The channel Savin had hated pulled the fire from red to orange to a white that hurt to look at, and he stood with his arms folded for a long time before speaking. Then he put a piece of scrap in and drew it out, and it moved under his hammer. It was only a smith hitting hot iron, but we had been listening to barrel hoops and cold files since the raid. Ista cried. Ista, who held a stare with 4 stitches in her arm and did not move. She stood at the back with a cup in her hand and cried at the sound of a hammer, and nobody said anything about it, and she would break the arm of anyone who mentioned it now. Bryn Saye took the first hour, because that was already in the agreement she had written with her good hand, and because Savin refused to touch the second heat until she had taken the first. The first production order was 31 frame saws, real ones, hearth-drawn, teeth to be set by Bryn. While both forges were being built, Savin's improvised blades kept the slow crews moving. Across those 20 days, the house count went from 34 to 51. Ista's crew finished a door frame in 40 minutes with the first proper saw, and Ista made them do another so she could time that too. Tessa found me at the ravine lip on the last evening, where the old post still lay across the rock with rope burns on it. She looked at the damage instead of me. Gratitude has never been our language, and I hope it never becomes one. She said that at Black Pass I had a plan and a tale of civilians behind it, and I protected the plan from the people. Here I had a plan worth twice its iron, in a settlement with no tools, and I broke it for the people without hunting for a way to have both. Then she said she had watched me the whole time, waiting for me to look for the loophole. She said she was ready for it. She had the sentence prepared. She said I never looked. I asked her whether that was forgiveness. She said no. It was one fact about one decision, and a man is not the best decision of his life any more than he is the worst 4 hours of it. Then she went back down to the shelf to check a flue. I stayed up there a while. 51 homes, 30 days, 49 houses to go, an order for 31 saws, a cooperative that owns its forge and writes its rules, and a girl with a strapped shoulder who checks every pin she touches. And somewhere in a warm office, the dies bearing our stolen certification mark were locked in a drawer. Their owner had just learned that Ashbank would destroy its own reward to pull 2 children off a wall. On the 100th day, we had 99 houses, 4 hours of daylight, and 1 old woman who would not be carried through her own door. 48 houses in 30 days. I still do not entirely believe that number, and I watched it happen. The forge did it. 31 frame saws, then augers, then chisels, then a proper set of squares, and then Savin started making tools for people to make tools with, which is when a settlement stops being a camp. Ista ran 4 crews and would not let any of them work past dark, because she had done the arithmetic on tired men and sharp saws and refused to spend a hand on the count. She lost us 2 days and no fingers. Nobody built a single house for me. They built for the claim was theirs, and I hauled stone for whichever crew Tessa's board sent me to that morning. Her name was Mira Sath. 91, out of a farm 2 days north of Black Pass, and she had come down that road 3 years ago in the back of a cart with her son walking beside the wheel. Her hips had finished with her about a year after. She used a chair. Oren Sath had built it out of a barrow frame and 2 seats worth of leather. It was the ugliest piece of furniture in the valley, and it worked. The standard plan has a raised 4-inch threshold stone. All 99 houses had it. One earlier household had a wider door and handrail, but the sill remained raised. It kept rain out and floors dry. 4 inches. A chair does not go over 4 inches, so the Sath household refused the house. Farron Ost had his commission open on a barrel when they set it. 2 contract office assessors stood beside him with the Crown's condition written out. 100 permanent homes in 100 days or the claim lapses, and 100 families are dispersed as vagrants. 99 certified. 4 hours of light. The 100th was standing, roofed, dry, and finished 40 strides away. Oren Sath, who had carried stone for other households for 10 weeks, faced the assessors and said his mother was not signing for a building she could enter only in somebody's arms. The camp made a sound. Not anger? Worse. That low noise 100 people make when they have all done the same arithmetic at the same time, and it has come out badly. Because it was not their house he was refusing. It was everyone's claim. And I opened my mouth to fix it. The dangerous part was a sentence I almost said. The sentence was already assembled. Sign the certification now, take the house on the count, and we cut the sill tomorrow. 4 hours of light, 100 families, a whole settlement's legal existence, against a stone we could take out with a chisel in the morning. It is a good sentence. It is reasonable. It costs nobody anything. Take the plan now. Fix the people afterward. I heard it in my own mouth before it got out, and it was in the same voice I used at Black Pass. I knew the voice. At Black Pass, it had also sounded practical, urgent, and temporary. I shut my mouth. All I did was not say it. Tessa gave them a better answer while I was still swallowing mine. She refused the certification. Her own build, her own crew, on the 100th day, with a royal clerk holding the pen, and she told Farron Ost the house was not finished. One of the assessors said it was standing, roofed, and dry, and asked her on what grounds. She said the declared function of a dwelling is that the people who live in it can get into it. Then, Mira Sath spoke, and she was the one who ended the argument because Tessa had the standing order and Mira had the actual point. She said she had been lifted through doors for 2 years. She said she was 91, and she was not afraid of dying, and she was not afraid of the crown, and she was tired. In a way, I have never been tired of arriving somewhere in another person's arms. She said a house you have to be carried into is a house that belongs to whoever carries you. Nobody in that quarry said a word. I have watched 100 families argue about everything from turnips to gallows, and that was the only time I ever saw all of them shut up at once. Then Tessa picked up a chisel and asked how many people we had. We took the sill out and put in a flush stone in 3 hours, 40 minutes. It is a harder job than it sounds. A flush threshold means the rain has nowhere to stop, so you cut a fall across the whole floor plate, and you run a drain channel outside the door, and you pitch the ground away. And if you get it wrong, the house floods, and the woman in the chair is sitting in it. Tessa got it right. Pell cut the drain. Bryn set the pins. Ista's crew did the floor fall with a frame saw from the forge rebuilt after its first frame went into the ravine. I did the footing, the sill bed, the door hanging, and about 200 barrow loads of spoil. Oren Sath worked next to me for the whole 3 hours and 40 minutes without speaking. At the end, he asked whether the doubled stone would come. I said it would, but only after I surrendered every claim. He said good and picked up his barrow. We finished with 20 minutes of light left. Mira Sath came up the path in the chair her son had built out of a barrow, and Oren stopped at the door and did not put his hands on the handles. She went in on her own. She had 4 inches of nothing to cross, and she crossed it herself, over a flush stone, in her own chair, in her own house, at 91, and the sound that 100 families made was not a cheer. Nell got there first, because Nell always gets there first. She ran in after her and asked Mira whether she could try the chair. Leja started to call her back and then did not. Mira let her sit in it. Nell rolled over the flush stone twice, out and in, testing the edge, then announced to the settlement that it worked. Farron Ost watched the chair cross under its own rider and wrote exactly what he saw. I gave the Sath household every claim, every key, every future say in that building. Mira Sath took the key with both hands because one was not steady, and she said the only word she said to me directly in 3 years, which was my name, and not as an accusation, just as an address. The return came twice. Stone, timber, tile, pins, the door irons, the drain channel plate, and 1 flush threshold stone doubled in sorted piles on ground I had chosen and was standing well clear of. 100 permanent homes, 100 families, 100 days. The Crown's arithmetic was finally complete. The Crown's condition was met 4 minutes past sunset by a 91-year-old woman crossing her own doorstep without help. Nothing about Black Pass improved. One present fact did. The house belonged to her. Then it took about 40 minutes for the Crown to explain that meeting its conditions was insufficient. Alric Crane arrived the next morning. I had not seen him in 3 years. He is 50, tidy, and entirely without theater. He does not shout or gloat, and every sentence comes with a filing that defends it. Beating him required a record he could not explain. He came with an assessor, 2 clerks, and a challenge, and he had General Cassian Severin riding 40 minutes behind him with 60 men, and those 2 were not together. That mattered enormously, and it took the settlement most of the day to see it. Crane's challenge was the road stamps. The first 34 house certificates carried Ashbank's local road mark. After the dies vanished in the Day 50 raid, Farron Ost certified the remaining 66 by numbered circuit ledger entries under his own seal and wrote local die missing beside everyone. Crane produced duplicate Ashbank certificates from the contract system. They carried our stolen mark and repeated our house numbers on empty shells, tool sheds, and carts. He did not admit possessing the dies. He argued that no clerk could tell from the local impression which Ashbank record was genuine, and that the whole provenance chain had to be frozen pending inquiry. Ost's direct ledger showed that 100 real houses stood in front of him. It did not explain how the same local numbers had entered Crown files elsewhere. Crane had let us build 66 more homes after the theft because each new circuit entry gave him another number to counterfeit. Farron Ost said the homes were sound because he had inspected them. Crane said, politely, that a clerk's memory could not cure conflicting Crown records. Ost did not enjoy that. It was the only time in 3 years I saw the man raise his voice, and he raised it about 4 inches. He said he had certified more than 1,000 works across this valley in 19 years and had never once had his hand called into question by a party who had reported the dye stolen and then declined to say where it went. He asked Crane, on the record, in front of his own clerks, whether the contract office was in possession of the dyes. Crane said the office could not comment on an active theft inquiry. Ost wrote that down. He wrote it word for word, and he read it back. And he made Crane's own clerk initial the entry. Ost wrote down exactly what happened, and that entry damaged Crane later at Black Pass. Then Severin came up the road, and he made it worse by being honest. He did not care about the stamps. He said so. He said the marks were a lawyer's argument, and he was not a lawyer. His position had not changed since the raid. 100 families beside a military supply road with no garrison and no chain of responsibility. Now with a forge, a certified road, a river crossing, and 10 defensive cells that had beaten a night raid, which from where he stood made us more dangerous rather than less. He would recognize the settlement, gates, keys, and stores to his quartermaster, and Darien Vale surrendered to frontier custody. That last one, he said, looking at me, and there was nothing personal in it at all, which I appreciated more than I can say. Crane found me alone that evening. Of course he did. He had come 3 days for a quarter hour by the forge wall. He opened his case on a barrow and laid out 3 draft filings, withdrawal of his provenance challenge, a corrected transport record, and a petition asking the Crown to reopen my appointment. He could not appoint a minister himself and did not pretend he could. He could clear the 2 filings that made any royal restoration possible, attach his recommendation, and return my undefaced seal if the Crown agreed. For a man with his contracts, that was a serious offer. The price was the land. The claim lapses, the families are resettled somewhere with a contract holder over them, and Darien Vale walks back into a warm office with his name on the door. He pointed out correctly that I could protect them far better from the capital than from a quarry, that everything I had built here I had given away, and that a man who owns nothing protects nobody. He pointed out correctly that Severin was going to take those gates one way or another, and that I could at least choose who held the keys. The refusal did not prove I was a better man than I had been 3 years earlier. It was not even hard. It was easy because I did the arithmetic, and his offer was worse. I have been trying for 3 years to become the kind of man who says no to that on principle. At that wall, a former defense minister ran the numbers, found that a seal in a drawer buys exactly 1 order before the man who kept it there takes it back, and declined a bad trade. Crane closed the case without any expression whatsoever. He said the offer had a term, and the term was the winter. He was not lying about that either. I went and told the council everything. The seal, the offer, the price, all of it, that night, in front of 7 food council seats and Bram and Tessa and Leja. Then I told them I was leaving. It was clean. It was obvious. Severin wanted one man, Crane wanted the land, and the only thing standing between Hearthcross and a legal existence was my name on their ground. Surrender to frontier custody, the general gets his responsible party, the charter argument gets easier, the city lives. I had it all worked out. I had a route, a day, and a form of words. I was quite proud of it, which should have warned me. Leia Tomasin took me apart in front of everybody. She asked who had decided, not what, who. I said it was my risk to remove. She said no. She said the risk was hers, and Nell's, and Oda's, and Mira Sath's, and 100 families, because we were the ones the cavalry would be standing in front of. I had sat in a room, worked out what was best for all of us, and arrived with a route and a day. She said she had heard that voice before. She said it was the voice of a man deciding which people the clock allows. Then she said the sentence I will be hearing when I die. She said that leaving was not the opposite of Black Pass. It was the same shape with better manners. I did not have an answer. I still do not. So they voted, and they did it the way this settlement does everything, which is badly, slowly, and in public. 100 family tokens. Every household, 1 token, cast into one of 2 crates in front of Farron Ost in daylight, with a count read aloud. The tokens were quarry chips. Savin wanted proper ones in iron, and Oda told him iron was for saws. So 100 families voted the future of their city with bits of the rock they had slept on for 3 years. The vote took 4 hours because Mira Sath's household went last. She insisted on coming to the crate herself, over her own flush stone, and down the path in her son's barrow chair. Nobody was going to tell a 91-year-old woman to send her token with somebody else. Ket Arlo voted from the deck. His lot was up on the rotation, and he would not leave the crossing, so 2 households poled a crate to the landing. He put his chip in with wet hands and returned to the poll. The count mattered less than the ferryman who had sold this settlement once, and now refused to leave his post for 4 minutes to vote on the man who pulled him out of a river. They voted on three things. The name came first and took the longest because 100 families brought 100 opinions. After 20 minutes, I understood that they were enjoying themselves. It was the first thing anyone had asked them to choose that was not about survival. Hearthcross won. Savin proposed it and would not explain it, so Bryn explained it for him. The hearth is the forge, and the flues, and the smokehouses, and every chimney Pell has ever refused to build a lie into. The cross is the crossing and Ket's rotation, and the fact that this place exists because people go back and forth over water for each other. Both halves are things they built. Neither half is me. I checked. I checked very carefully. Second, they voted the roads, the waterworks, the spring line, the wash house, and the ferry into public ownership. No household, no council seat, and no minister can sell them, pledge them, or close them. Third, they voted the keys apart. Trade, health, defense, and construction. 4 keys, 4 holders, no person holding 2, and no single seat able to act for the city alone. Oda's Food Council folded itself into the trade key without being asked to. Because the holders often worked apart, the charter accepted lamp and whistle assent witnessed by 2 households and entered afterward. Bram posted the signal table, but we never drilled it under pressure. Urgent requests still found their way to me. I approved the clause, called my ignorance delegation, and left the table to the people using it instead of learning their signals. Bramsay refused the defense key. He stood before the city and said that if Hearthcross's defense fitted into one man's pocket, the raiders had won when they struck and simply had not been told. The cells would keep their own whistles and rotas. The key would hold gates and alarm posts, nothing that breathed. Then he nominated the key to a rotation of 4 households drawn every 20th day and made them write it down that no holder of it may issue an order to a cell. He built a defense key that cannot command the defense. That design still surprises me. Etta took the health key without a word of debate because nobody in that city was going to propose an alternative and live. And then they voted on me, which I had asked them not to do, and which Leja put on the crate anyway. They voted to keep me. 71 to 29. I am not going to pretend that number did nothing to me. 29 families wanted me gone. Each cast a token in daylight where I could see their face, then worked beside me the next morning. But the vote was 2 lines, and the second line is the one that matters. Hearthcross accepts the legal risk of sheltering Darien Vale. Darien Vale may leave as a free man, but he may not present his departure or surrender as a bargain made on the city's behalf. Leja wrote that second line. The vote did not imprison me. It denied me authority to trade Hearthcross's claim, safety, or legal risk for my custody and call the trade a sacrifice. Severin heard the count and rejected it inside a minute. He said a vote is not a chain of command. He said that when his men are killed on that road, he cannot present a crate of tokens to their families. He was not being cruel, and he was not wrong, and he rode out without taking anybody. Crane did not reject anything. He filed. By the end of the week, the road contracts were suspended, our certifications were marked as provenance unknown, and Hearthcross was posted in every valley office as an unlawful fortified camp with a disgraced minister inside it. The cart stopped the same day. Sedgeford's carters were told their route rights would be reviewed. Marrowfen sent a boy up with a message that said his household would keep hiring hands, and the contract office could review whatever it liked. We had a name, a charter nobody recognized, 100 houses certified with a stolen stamp, and no road. And on the 9th evening, a boat came up from the lower reach, pulled by a boy who had been rowing since dark, with a message out of Dren Bank. 18 families, enemy side of the pass, Draven ground, running for the river chain with everything they owned on 4 wagons. Behind them, a warrant for enemy collaboration, and Severin's cavalry riding to serve it. Yara Dren's proof arrived wrapped around a broken axle pin, and it was the ugliest argument for mercy I have ever been handed. The boy from the lower reach had pulled all night. What he carried was a strip of wagon cover, folded small, and a note in a hand that had been taught to write by somebody who did it properly. 18 families, 61 people, 23 of them children, 4 wagons. They had come off Draven ground 3 days earlier with a warrant behind them naming every adult as an enemy collaborator. The warrant was not a lie, which made refusal easy to justify. They had lived beyond the pass for more than a decade, traded under Draven rule, and could not deny the facts written on the page. They had sold grain to Draven quartermasters, because Draven quartermasters were the ones who came to their doors with money in a wagon. Some of their sons were in the Draven levy. They had done exactly what people do when an army owns the road outside your house, which is stay alive on the terms available. Then the Draven side turned on them for being Asterborn, and now they were running toward us, and behind them was a legal warrant that Cassian Severin was writing to serve. Nobody at Hearthcross had to invent a reason to say no. The reasons walked in the door on their own. Oda put the cost up first, and she did it without one word about morality, which is why the city listened. We were 9 days out from the charter embargo. The road contracts were suspended, the Valley Carters had been told their route rights were under review, and the only food moving into Hearthcross was Sedgeford wages and what our own plots produced. 22 days of reserve for 100 families. 61 more mouths took it to 16. She wrote both numbers on the board, 22 and 16. Then she stood back and said she was the trade key, and it was her job to say what a thing costs, not what a thing is worth, and she was finished. Oda's brief statement was the argument's cleanest contribution. 16 days was not a moral abstraction or a number to admire on a board. It meant Nell Thomason eating less before the month ended. The argument lasted 2 days and was the worst the city had endured. The version where everyone was kind would be a lie, and the version where everyone was a monster would be a bigger one. A man whose brother died at Black Pass asked why we should starve for people who had been feeding the army that did it. A woman from the 8 houses said she had been called an enemy collaborator herself, on a road, by men with a warrant, and asked how many of us remembered what that word had cost us 3 years ago. Somebody said we had 100 houses and 100 families, and the count was the count, and the Crown's condition was met, and 18 more families would break the arithmetic that had just saved us. Somebody else said that 101 families is not a legal problem, it is a housing problem, and we had a forge now. The household holding the defense key asked Bram for a recommendation. He refused. His cells were split down the middle, and he would not let the defense apparatus speak on who got to live here. That was how a defense key became a government. The key household cast one family token like everyone else. Possession of a gate added no vote. Many families still looked at me. I gave them routes with honest costs, then stopped before useful information became another command. 4 ways across. The chain crossing at the military bank, which was locked. The lower ford, which was 4 hours downstream and would have to be walked with children in the dark. Ket's Crossing, which meant a ferry pulling 4 wagons in daylight in front of a cavalry patrol. And the culvert line under the old quarry road, which fitted people and no wagons at all. I put the costs on each one, honestly, including the ones that made helping look expensive. Then I sat down. I did not vote. I do not have a vote. That is what a token is for, and I do not have one of those either. And for once, that arrangement was doing precisely the work it was designed to do. Then a man named Cor Hale stood up and said what half that quarry had been chewing on for 2 days. He said the minister wants them across. He was not shouting. That is what made it land. He laid it out like a bill. 18 families off Draven ground, out of a place 4 miles from Black Pass. Arriving in the one season, Darien Vale needs a witness. He said I had put 4 routes on that board with costs on everyone. Very fair, very honest, and that a man who does not want a thing does not usually bring 4 ways to get it. He said 16 days of food is a cheap price for a man buying his own name back. I kept silent for tactical reasons, not humility, not out of humility. I stood there and calculated that anything I said would sound exactly like a man defending an interest, that Cor Hale was half right in a way I could not disprove, and that the fastest way to sink the 18 families was for me to open my mouth in their defense. So I let a man call me a liar in front of the city, and I did not answer, and it was tactics. Oda answered him in 1 sentence and did not defend me at all. She said if the minister wants them across, then the minister is right this once. And does anyone have an argument that is about the 61 people in the river instead of about him? Cor Hale sat down. He voted against at the end in daylight, with his own chip. He also stood in the ford 4 days later for 4 hours with a rope in his hands. Because Cor Hale is not a villain. He is a man who lost a brother and wanted somebody to say the quiet part out loud. I have never held it against him. He was the only person in that quarry doing my job, which is asking who benefits. Leja found the mark before the vote, and she did not tell the assembly, and I have never worked out whether that was integrity or cowardice or the only sane thing to do. She came to my door at midnight with the strip of wagon cover from Yara's boy, and the torn cover strip out of her own coat, and put them on the table under a lamp. Same numbering pattern. The same stamped sequence running along the spine of Thomas's manifest cover was running along the hem of a wagon tarpaulin that had come off Draven ground on the back of an 18-family convoy. Those wagons had been at Black Pass, on the night. The 12 that the manifest said were broken. The 18 families running toward our chain had spent more than a decade beside physical proof that Alric Crane sold a civilian convoy for silver. I was the man whose name was on the gate order. That fact did not disappear simply because Crane's crime was worse. I understood the shape of it inside a breath, and the shape was this. The best possible thing for Darien Vale had just become identical to the most generous thing Hearthcross could do, and if anyone found that out before the vote was finished. Leja put it plainly. She said if she stood up tomorrow and said the newcomers might carry evidence that helps Darien Vale, then every family that already believed I was running this city would have their proof, and the 18 would drown for it. She also said that if she stayed quiet and it came out afterward, it would be worse. So she did the thing I would never have thought of, because I am a man who has spent his life choosing which half of the truth arrives first. She told Farron Ost, privately, that night, in writing, sealed, held by the clerk. Not told to the city, not hidden from it. Recorded with a man who answers to a bench so that whatever the city decided, nobody could ever say it had been decided on a secret. Then she went into the assembly and argued for the 18 without using it once. Her argument took about a minute, and I have never heard anything better. She said this city has 100 houses because a woman refused to be carried through her own door. She said we did not build Hearthcross to have a good count. She said a refuge that opens its gate for the people who arrived first and closes it on schedule is not a refuge. It is a household. And households are what we had before the crown pushed us into this quarry. Then she said the part that turned it, and she said it looking at the man whose brother died at Black Pass. Everyone heard it. She said her husband died outside a gate that a good man closed on a timetable, and that the difference between that gate and this chain is that this time the people inside get asked. She said that for 3 years she had been the person the gate closed on. She would not spend one afternoon being the gate. They voted temporary equal protection, 64 to 36. Full rights to be heard at a proper hearing inside 60 days, not as a condition of rescue, and not conditioned on obedience to anybody. Yaradren refused a condition before it was offered, which is how I knew we were going to get along badly and usefully. Her answer came back by the same boy. She would not accept protection contingent on her family's taking orders from Darien Vale or anyone else. She said she had run from one place where safety came with a chain of command, and she would drown before she signed into another. Oda read that out and said she liked this woman already. The military bank controlled the obvious route. An iron chain blocked Ket's upper ferry channel, and the winch post above it overlooked the military ford. It had been raised since Crane posted us as an unlawful camp. The lower ford lay 4 hours downstream and out of direct sight, but a patrol watching the upper bank would still see any organized movement toward it. Ket proposed the decoy, and the rotation made sure restitution did not become another attempt to drown alone. He proposed 3 empty runs by the one ferry we owned, loud and regular at the upper landing, doing exactly what a settlement preparing to move refugees would appear to do. He wanted the patrol to spend 2 hours counting one empty boat while the wagons walked toward the lower ford. The rotation would not let him do it alone, which he had been counting on, and which annoyed him considerably. His lot was not even up. 2 households drew for the deck beside him, and both of them turned up anyway, and one of them was Leja Thomason, whose lot was also not up. That is what a rotation is for. He could not martyr himself because the schedule said no. The crossing used separate teams and no commander. From third position on the shore rope, I saw only the people beside me and followed our crew lead. No voice carried far enough to turn the whole operation toward one person. Bryn Seye ran the chain. 14 years old, one shoulder still stiff, and she had worked out that you do not cut a 40-year-old chain. You unpin the far bank anchor plate, 4 bolts, and it drops under its own weight and takes an hour to winch back. Savin made the wrench. Bryn crossed the lower ford at night with 2 adults from Bram's cells, followed a disused drainage shelf behind the anchor housing, and worked under its stone lip, while Ket made enough noise at the landing to keep the picket facing upstream. The 4 bolts came out and the chain dropped. The wagons came over at dawn. They came over the lower ford, not the ferry. Dropping the chain let Ket run the visible upper channel and pulled the picket's attention toward the anchor while 61 people walked downstream in the dark with Bram's rope teams. It took a little over 4 hours, and every minute of it was work. The ford runs below the knee in a dry month, and it was carrying meltwater. Bram's rope teams went in first and stood in it, on both banks and twice in the middle, and made a fence out of themselves that the wagons could feel their way along in the dark. Darkness protected the crossing. Lamps on the water would have exposed it from the military bank, so 61 people moved by touch, gripping a rope and following neighbors who stood waist-deep in snow water until every wagon passed. The third wagon lost a wheel halfway. Harl Saya and 4 Sedgeford men got the axle onto a spar and carried it out on their shoulders with the wagon still loaded, because unloading it in the ford would have taken longer than carrying it. A child went in. She came out almost immediately in the hands of a woman from the salt line who had been standing exactly where Bram's chart said to stand, doing exactly the job the chart gave her, which was to be the person in the water at the place where a child would go in. Bram Sayez's system fit inside that moment. Nobody had to race in for the child. Somebody was already standing there. Upstream, Ket ran the same empty ferry back and forth in plain sight with Leia Thomason on the pole beside him. The picket watched one empty boat for more than 2 hours, and Ket Arlo has never been prouder of doing nothing. Nobody drowned, nobody was taken. Nobody gave one order that reached more than 9 people. I carried rope. I was told twice to move, and I moved. Severin's cavalry reached the boundary as the last wagon came out of the water. 60 horses at 100 strides in daylight, with a lawful warrant naming every adult in front of them. And between the warrant and the horses were 61 people, half of them children, standing in the shallows of a river in Aster ground. He stopped. I was close enough to see him do it, and that minute has stayed with me. He was not moved and did not have a change of heart. Cassian Severin looked at a river full of families and a warrant in his hand and did the arithmetic of a man who had to write a report. He said to his own officers, loudly enough for us to hear, that the warrant was for collaborators and what was in that water was a wagon train of children, and that any man who could not tell the difference had no business on his frontier. Then he said the second half, and the second half was for us. Every officer on the bank turned toward him and waited. He said Hearthcross was now in open violation. Harboring warranted persons, obstruction of a military boundary, and interference with a chain under royal maintenance. He said he would be filing all of it, and that when he came back, it would not be with an offer. He kept both warrant and position while refusing to become the soldier who fires into a ford. Severin gave the families room to live without pretending the law, the frontier, or his judgment had changed. He gave us everything and conceded nothing, and I would rather face Crane twice. Yara Dren came out of the water last, because of course she did. She is 33. She had been awake for 4 days, and the first thing she did on Aster ground was ask which of us was the trade key, so she could tell Oda exactly how many of her people could work and at what. Not thank you. An inventory. She asked me nothing. Her family slept first in their wagons beside an unfinished terrace. Before the hard freeze, Hearthcross roofed 18 plain houses from stored returns without tying shelter to testimony. Yara went straight to the people who decided things. Leia brought her the cover strip in front of Farron Ost, with the sealed note from 2 nights before opened and read aloud first, so that the whole thing happened in the right order and nobody could ever say otherwise. Yara looked at the tarpaulin hem, then at Thomas's cover, and then she said she had been sleeping under that wagon cover since Black Pass. The mark under the numbering was a private silver stamp. Not a crown mark. A commissioner's own consignment brand, the kind a man puts on cargo he is moving for himself. And it was on the hem of a tarpaulin that had covered a wagon the Black Pass manifest recorded as broken beyond use. She knew what had happened to the pages after the fire, but not where they were now. Her people had watched the Aster Customs House burn from 4 miles away. The fire started at the outer corners and left the stone record vault standing. 9 days later, 2 of Yara's cousins were paid to load a sealed record crate from that vault onto a cart bearing Crane's haulage mark and the same private silver stamp. The crate entered the bonded store network. Her cousins had not been told its destination, and the consignment number was hidden under a broker code. The full manifest had left Black Pass alive. Finding the current store required somebody inside Crane's contract chain. Oda's board said 16 days. Severin was filing. Crane had the roads. The record crate that could break them was somewhere inside his bonded stores, and Black Pass was the last place its chain of custody could be proved. Then the signal fires started on the northern hamlets, and everything else had to wait. I saved 430 people on the second night of winter, and it is the worst thing I have done since Black Pass. Both of those sentences are true. I have stopped trying to make them sit down together. The Cardle fire rose just before the 9th hour, when Hollow and Little Ash repeated it along the northern ridges below the North Dam. In those hamlets, a signal fire carried one meaning: the water above them was no longer safe. There is an old contract dam 4 miles up the North Water, holding back a season of meltwater above 3 hamlets that were built in the wrong place 90 years ago by people who did not expect a dam. Crane's contract troops cut the sluice gear at dusk, after the first alarm was already moving people, not blown it. Cut it and jammed the gate, which meant the dam was going to go in its own time, over hours, and nobody could say which hour. 430 souls on an exposed bank with a wall of water above them, and no way to know whether it came at midnight or at dawn. The only ground high enough and close enough to hold them was ours. To reach us, they had to cross the military causeway, a raised stone road over the marsh that had remained under Severin's seal since the ford. Opening it required the scattered civic keys, and the flood would not wait for their holders to walk home. I decided the city could not answer. 4 keys: trade, health, defense, construction. Causeway use: Wagon requisitions and ferry changes required all 4 assents. The charter allowed signatures in one room or a witnessed lamp and whistle relay. Each holder had a pattern, 2 households recorded the answer, and the marks went into the ledger afterward. I knew the signature rule. I had never learned the relay table because urgent requests had always come through me. Oda was at Sedge Ford, 4 hours away by road, negotiating winter grain because the embargo had us at 16 days. Etta was at Little Ash. She had gone up 2 days earlier for a difficult berth, which put the health key across the threatened water. Harn Dorn held the defense key on rotation and was on the eastern boundary with 2 of Bram's cells because Severin's filing had brought patrols onto our line. Tessa was here. Those locations were public. Oda's negotiation sat on the trade board, Etta had sent notice of the berth, and Harn's duty appeared on Bram's posted boundary rota. Crane did not need a spy inside Hearthcross to choose the night. 1 key out of 4 was physically in the city. Tessa reached for Bram's relay table and I stopped her. I said verifying distant lamp answers would cost time we did not have, then sent runners. The runner to Oda still had to cross the ferry. The runner to Bram had to go around the eastern patrols, because a Hearthcross man moving fast at night past a picket that has just filed against us gets stopped, and being stopped costs an hour. The runner to Etta had to go to Little Ash, which was the hamlet we were trying to empty. I did the arithmetic on the ration board with a piece of chalk, and I did it 3 times because I did not like it. Best case, all 4 holders physically back in one room, was 6 hours. Realistic was 9. The wagons then had to go out, load, and return over a causeway we did not have permission to use. The dam had been cut 90 minutes earlier. I was not guessing. I had moved 40,000 people off a frontier and knew in my hands what an authorization delay did below a broken dam. Depending on when the masonry failed, waiting meant no deaths or every death. It looks like a number. And that night, the number ran from none to every soul on the bank, depending entirely on when a piece of 90-year-old contract masonry decided to let go. That was when the clerk came up the road. He was a young man out of the Valley Court, one of Farron Ost's, carrying a wooden case with a broken lock and an inventory sheet. He said the dies had been recovered. A cart with contract office paint had gone into a ditch outside the valley 2 days earlier. The local bench impounded our road stamp box from it. Crane's inventory called everything inside recovered Ashbank dies and unrecorded settlement property, and the return order sent the whole box to us. The young clerk followed that order exactly. Our certification dies, the stolen stamps, the whole provenance argument that had made 100 houses unlawful, sitting in a box on a barrow. Underneath them, wrapped separately and mislabeled as an unrecorded Ashbank die, was my ministerial seal. The pattern was visible in my hand, and I refused to see it. A contract cart had delivered the exact object that cleared our charter and a 3-year-old ministerial seal that had no reason to travel with it on the one night a broken dam scattered our key holders. The false inventory was visible in my hand. I had the whole shape in my hands, and I did not turn it over. That is not Crane being clever. That is me not wanting to look. The seal still worked. My office had been revoked by decree. A separate revocation should then have removed the seal from Frontier and contract rolls and sent the die for defacing. Crane suppressed that entry and kept the die intact. Yard clerks and military gates checked an impression against the active roll, not the man holding it. The stamp would be obeyed immediately even though I no longer had lawful authority to use it. 1 stamp. No keys, no signatures, no hours. Tessa was standing right there when I picked it up. She did not say, "Do not." I have to be honest about that too, because it would be easier if she had. She asked one question first, and I have gone back to it every day since. She asked what the seal did. I gave her the short answer. Requisition, causeway, immediate, no counter-signature. And she said nothing for about 2 seconds. 2 seconds is a very long time for Tessa Marr, who has never in her life needed longer than 1 to know whether a thing will stand. I filled the silence. That is what I did with the only opening anybody gave me that night. I filled it with the arithmetic. 6 hours, 9 realistic, 90 minutes gone. And I watched her decide that arguing with a man holding a stamp above a broken dam was going to cost lives she could count. So she gave me the thing she could still give me, which was engineering. She said the causeway is stone over marsh, 90 years old, it has a load rating, and if I ran heavy wagons over it in column at speed, I would drop the 3rd span into the mud with people on it. She gave me a load pattern. Light wagons first, spaced at 40 strides, no column, and the heavy carts empty on the return. I took it. Every word of it. I changed the whole loading plan on her say-so inside a minute. She watched me do it without hesitation, and I took her silence for approval. I remember thinking this was fine, that I was still listening, that the difference between me and the man at Black Pass stood in the fact that I had accepted a builder's correction under a clock. I had missed it entirely. She was not objecting to the load. She had told me exactly how to do the thing correctly, because that is her job, and she will always do her job. And the question she never got to ask was whether I had the right to do it at all. I stamped 41 requisitions in about 10 minutes, wagons out of 2 contract yards, the causeway open, the orders left at once. The ferry rotation overridden, which meant I put Ket Arlo on a schedule that 3 households had drawn by lot, and Ket looked at the paper, and then at me, and then he went, because a ministerial seal is what he had spent his whole life being told to obey. There was no speech. Ket looked at the stamp, looked at me, and obeyed. Through a runner, I ordered Bram's cells where I wanted them. It was the first blanket command I had given since Bram posted their separate roles. And it worked. Every one of the 430 came off that bank in 5 hours and 40 minutes. When Hollow moved first because it stood lowest, then the Cardle, then Little Ash. Competence made the trespass more dangerous, not less. I ran it off a cart tailboard with a lantern and a slate, and I was good at it. Leaving that out would make me a fool instead of what I actually was, a capable man using the wrong authority. I had the hamlets emptying in reverse order of elevation, because the lowest people have the least time and the highest can still walk if the wagons fail. Empty carts on the outside lane, loaded on the inside, so a broken axle could never cork the causeway. Edda's station was at the near abutment, a casualty post beyond a bridge as decoration. Nobody taught me that. I paid for it at Black Pass, and I have never once been able to put it down. The causeway held because I used Tessa's spacing. The third span groaned at the 4th hour, and I stopped everything for 10 minutes while Savin went under it with a lamp. He came out and said, "Run," and we ran. And it held. Little Ash came out last and came out hard. Water was already in the lower street when the final 4 wagons went in, and Ket took the ferry across a river he had called too fast 2 hours earlier. He did it twice because I had stamped an order. Edda then walked out with the last of them carrying a 2-day-old baby she had delivered in a house now flooded to its upper windows. She handed the child to its mother on our bank, and then she turned around and asked me who had authorized the causeway. I told her. She studied me with her hands still wet, said nothing, and went to set up her station in the wash house. Edda then understood the whole thing inside 4 seconds before dawn, holding somebody else's baby. 200 wet children stood behind her. The argument could wait. The trust cost had started while I was still congratulating myself. Crane's blast went off at the 4th hour. He had put charges in the dam's east abutment and fired them to make the flood look like a collapse, and the flood came down about 40 minutes later and took Wen Hollow off the map. There was nobody in it. I stood on the high bank and watched a hamlet come apart, and every soul who had lived in it was standing behind me on our ground, wet, furious, alive. And there is a part of me that has never come down off that bank and never will. All 430, not a plan or a number on a board. Cor Hale's cousin, more than 200 children. The woman who had sold us the first legal grain cart, standing in our wash house in her nightclothes at 4 in the morning drinking Oda's tea. They were alive. After the water fell, Cardle and Little Ash returned above the mud. The 12 homeless Wen Hollow families ate from Oda's emergency count, slept in our shared rooms, then moved in with kin in the surviving hamlets. I would be lying if I said I was sorry, and I am not going to say it. Crane published my orders a week and a half later. He had copies of all 41 requisitions. Not stolen. He had the yard counterfoils because a requisition leaves a stub in the contract yard it takes wagons from, and the stubs went straight to the contract office, which is his office, which is why he put the seal in that box. He also had the fire. The largest signal fire, the one at the Cardle that made 3 hamlets move at once, had been lit before any lookout could have seen damage at the dam, and before the actual sluice cut. Crane produced the man who lit it and had him testify that the first alarm was staged to force an evacuation. The dam was real. The flood was real. Wen Hollow is gone and a dozen families lost everything they owned, and the water cared nothing for whose plan it was. None of that stopped him standing in a valley court and saying the words that finished us, and every one of them was true. The disgraced Minister of Defense, exiled for closing a gate on civilians, had used a revoked office's seal to requisition Crown property and open a sealed military causeway. In one night, he had overridden a civil rotation and moved his own settlement's defense cells by order, without consulting a single one of the 4 keys his charter said governed him. Hearthcross is not a refuge. It is a private command with 100 houses around it, and the man who is supposed to be under its authority proved in 5 hours and 40 minutes that he can bypass the entire thing whenever he decides the clock says so. I had spent more than 100 days building the argument that Hearthcross governs itself. I destroyed it in minutes with a piece of iron, and it did not even feel like a decision. The valley moved fast, because the valley was already frightened. 4 settlements froze trade inside a week, and none of them believed a word Crane said. Assisting a private army is treason, and nobody wants to be the test case. Severin took the causeway. Legally, with paper, and he did not enjoy it. He wrote up to tell me himself. He said he had spent weeks arguing that Hearthcross was a functioning civil settlement and not a rogue minister with a militia, and I had cost him that argument. Then he said the worst thing anyone said to me that winter. He said he would have done exactly the same thing on that bank, and that this was why the frontier does not let men like us hold a seal. Sedgeford's carters lost their route rights. Morrow Fen kept hiring hands anyway, and it cost him his boat license. Oda's board went from 16 days to 9. The council reconvened on the 14th day in the clinic because it was the only room warm enough. I laid out the arithmetic because they were entitled to it. 90 minutes elapsed. 6 hours best case for 4 holders to return in person. 9 realistic. The chalk was still on the ration board. Then I stopped because the arithmetic was correct and it was not the point, and I knew it was not the point, and pretending otherwise in front of those people would have been worse than what I had already done. Oda asked one question. She asked whether I had tried to reach her. I said yes. 1 runner. She said the ferry ran at night with 2 households and a lantern signal. Her witness descent could have reached the quarry immediately, and she could have been there in 90 minutes. Etta's clinic lamp linked Little Ash to our wash house. The eastern alarm post could relay Harn's key pattern. Tessa had been beside me. All 4 answers could have been witnessed before the first wagon order. Oda's lantern ended the argument I had been making to myself. 9 hours was an honest calculation of physical travel. It was wrong because I had never learned the system whose permission I was calculating. I had always assumed the system would be waiting for me. Leia said it last, and she said it in about 9 words. She said I had decided again which voices the clock allowed. She did not raise her voice. She was not angry, and that was the unbearable part. She said Thomas had been in the tail because the tail was slow. Oda at Sedge Ford because grain was slow, Etta at Little Ash because a berth was slow, and Harn on the boundary because a patrol was slow. She said the clock is always right, and it is always the same clock, and it always finds the same people slow, and I always do the same arithmetic, and I always get the same answer. Then she said the only thing that has ever made me want to argue with her, which was that she had thought I was different now, and that it was her own fault for thinking it. Tessa took my keys, 2 of them. The material yard, where the return stock is held, which the city had given me after the 100th home because I am the one who makes the piles and somebody has to hold the gate. And my place on the gift return schedule, which is not a key at all, it is a line on her board, and she struck it through with a pencil in front of everybody. She did it herself. Nobody made her. She is the construction key, and it was hers to do, and she did it standing up at the table, and she did not look away while she did it. She suspended me from command, contracting, and gift return planning, pending a public hearing at a date the city would set. Before the meeting ended, Farron Ost sealed the ministerial die into his evidence case. Tessa and Leja witnessed the inventory, and I surrendered it. The seal left my hands under numbered cords. Then she asked formally whether I intended to comply. That question nearly took my legs. After more than 100 days, after the forge and the ravine, she still had to ask on the record whether I would obey a suspension, because 2 weeks earlier I had proved I might not. I said yes. I did not threaten to leave. I did not point at the saved. I did not ask for a term or an appeal or a form of words. I put the yard key on the table, went back to my bunk in the Smith's overflow shed, and lay there listening to a city I had just proved could be commanded. Nell found me in the shed the next morning. She had walked over on her own with a piece of bread she was not supposed to have, and she sat down on the end of the bunk and asked whether I was in trouble. I said I was. When she asked whether I had done something bad, I told her I had. She thought about that with the seriousness she brings to everything, and then asked whether the people from Wen Hollow were still alive. I said yes. She said then it was not bad, it was expensive, and looked extremely pleased with herself, because she was 9 now and had worked out that words have edges. I did not correct her, and that failure bothers me more than the seal. I could have explained that a man can be right about the water and wrong about everything else. I stayed quiet because I wanted one person in that city to think well of me. Leja came and got her about 4 minutes later. She did not scold either of us. She stood in the door of that shed and looked at me holding her daughter's stolen bread, and then she took Nell's hand and left. She never told Nell not to come back. Through my suspension, the person with the most right to judge Darien Vale never made her daughter's choice for her. Crane's blockade closed the road 4 days later. He did not need soldiers for it. he filed. Route rights, carriage licenses, and a treason exposure notice served on every carter in the valley, and by the end of the week there was nothing moving into Hearthcross except what came over a river on a ferry that no longer took my orders. 9 days of food. No road, no causeway, no allies. 118 families, 4 keys, and a suspended minister in a shed, and a missing Black Pass record crate somewhere in Crane's bonded store chain. I reported to Tessamar at first light on the 15th day of the blockade and asked her where she wanted me. She looked at my hands, not my face, and said the north drain and handed me a shovel. A shovel and a drain were the entire ceremony. Tessa offered no terms, speech, or acknowledgement that I had moved the causeway evacuees weeks earlier. The task needed doing, and my suspension allowed me to do it. The rules of my suspension were 4 lines, and Bram had read them out loud so nobody could say later they had been softened. Darien Vale may work. Darien Vale may not instruct any person outside his own crew. Darien Vale may not speak in council. Any observation he wishes the city to have goes to his crew lead in writing, and the crew lead decides whether it goes further. The Dren family's promised rights hearing went ahead on the 12th day of the blockade. All 18 households entered the civic roll with the same rights as the first 100. I was suspended from council and had no part in the decision. In writing, that was Oda's addition, and it was surgical. She had watched me talk my way through 100 rooms, and she knew perfectly well that a man like me can run a settlement out of a shed with nothing but helpful remarks. So I dug drains. The north run took 9 days. It is 400 strides of clay and takes the runoff away from the washhouse line. Get the fall wrong and you flood the clinic. When it was finished, Tessa kept me on the lower ditches with the same shovel and the same restriction. Nobody worked with me for the first 2 days. Then Harndorn turned up on the 3rd morning, said nothing at all, and started digging the other end. By the 6th day there were 12 of us, and one of them was Cor Hale, who had voted twice against me in public and who dug the worst section, the rock end, and complained about it continuously, and never once mentioned the seal. Meanwhile, Hearthcross fought a blockade without me, and I had a shovel and an excellent view. Crane's plan was sound. He had the road under a treason exposure notice, the causeway under Severin's seal, and formal ferry trade under a route license review. Every legal way into that city was shut, and he had done it without one soldier, and he was waiting for the food to make the argument for him. 9 days of reserve when he closed it. Oda took it to 26 inside 3 weeks, and she did it by attacking her own side first. She went through Hearthcross like a plague. Portion waste, spoilage, the bread ration, the way we were feeding the Smiths at the hearth instead of at the fire, the 14 households who had been quietly keeping a little back because they had been hungry once, and it does that to people. She did not punish one of them. She published everything. The board went from a reserve count to a full accounting, every sack in, every sack out, every family's draw in the open, where 118 households could see exactly who was carrying what. The hoarding stopped in 4 days. Nobody was ever named. Then she opened the nightline. It is not smuggling. Crane's notice bites carriers, cargo, and licensed trade. It says nothing about a Sedgeford household giving hired hands their own wages at its own door, because that is the loophole I built in the spring and Oda had kept open ever since. So she moved the operation tonight, doubled the hands, and had them walk home over the rim path carrying what a working person carries. 12 at a time, 4 times a night, in the dark, up 400 strides of wet rock. It is a stupid way to feed a city. It is also unstoppable, because to stop it, Crane would have to make it illegal for a man to carry his own dinner home. He tried anyway. He filed an amendment on the 22nd day arguing that organized carriage of wages in kind constituted a licensed haulage operation. Oda read it, took an hour, and split the nightline into households. Not 12 hands walking together, 12 separate people, walking home from their own jobs at separate hours on a public path. Then she posted the whole schedule on the board where the tax writer could copy it, and had Farron Ost witness that no person was carrying for any person other than themselves. It cost us 3 hours a night in efficiency, and it made the amendment worthless. Crane can outlaw an operation. He has never worked out how to outlaw 100 people going home. Morrow Fen lost his boat license over it in the 2nd week and kept hiring. He sent a message up the rim path with the hands that said his household had been drying fish on that bank for 200 years, and he would be doing it when the contract office was a hole in the ground. Etta broke her own clinic apart the same week. She had a stone building with a flue and a sealed door that she had wanted for 3 years. And she looked at Crane's notices and split the clinic across 10 rooms in the city. 6 houses, the washhouse back room, 2 smokehouses, and a corner of the forge. Medicine split, records split, no one room holding more than a day's supply. I asked her why, because I could not see the threat. She said a clinic is one door. She said if a bailiff walks up that path with a seizure order for an unlawful camp stores, he will not take my houses and he will not take Bram's whistles. He will take the one building with everything valuable in it. And then she is a healer with a stone room and no medicine. She had prepared it on the day she took the health key and kept the distribution plan folded in her apron. Nobody made Etta Ven do that. Nobody asked her. Bram had 10 cells on 4 routes. Ket ran our one ferry empty so often that the picket stopped recording each pass, which was the entire point. Savin and the apprentices went down into the ravine for the old forge. 9 days of iron had been lying in that cut under 60 feet of scree and river. Savin had refused to touch it since the first forge fell because he said a man does not rob his own grave. Then the blockade closed, and he went down on a rope with Harl and pulled up more than half a ton of the frame we had dropped to save 2 children. Bryn cut it into hand tools, every one of them. The frame that would have paid us twice its iron worked cold and slow into the saws that kept 118 families building through a winter siege. She put a second bellows on the hearth so 2 crews could work one fire, and started training a Drenbank boy on the first hour that used to be hers. Nobody wrote a song about it. They needed chisels. And on the 19th day from a drain, I saw something. The Nightline and Ket's decoys were both using the rim path. Different hours, different people, no overlap on paper. On the ground, they were sharing one section of wet rock above a 60-foot drop, and the decoy crews came down it fast because their whole job is to look busy. Sooner or later, in the dark, 12 people carrying grain were going to meet 4 people running, and somebody was going off that rim. 3 months earlier, I would have walked over and fixed it. It would have taken me 90 seconds. I would have been right, and everyone would have thanked me, and it would have cost this city another inch of the thing it had almost died getting back. I wrote it on a piece of slate and gave it to Tessa at the end of my shift. She read it in about 4 seconds. Then she said no. Not to the risk. She agreed with the risk inside a breath. She said no to my answer, which had been to move the decoy runs to the lower path. She said the lower path is visible from the military bank for 200 strides, which I knew, and that the whole value of Ket's decoys is that the picket sees them, which I also knew, and that I had solved the collision by throwing away the reason the decoys exist. I had done exactly what I always do. I had found the risk, taken the piece I understood, and optimized it into the ground. Her answer was better, and it took her about a minute. She put a lamp cell on the rim. 1 person, 1 lamp, at the pinch point, all night. Red glass means someone is on the rock. Nobody moves until it is dark again. It cost 1 person per night, kept both systems intact, and used Bram's lampposts, which I had walked past every day without seeing. I said it was a better answer. She said she knew and returned to her crew. That was as close as Tessa and I came to romance that winter. She read a piece of slate, told me her answer was better, and returned to her crew. I accepted the correction and went back to my drain. I did not argue. I did not find a way to have both. I did not. And this is the one that would have been easy. Walk down to Bram that evening and mention the rim path in passing so that the right answer arrived without her name on it. 5 weeks earlier, I could not manage 90 minutes. That night I managed 1 shovel and a piece of slate. Salt broke on the 24th day. He asked for me. Of course he asked for me. 4 months in the old quarry office, watching a city he had tried to burn feed him twice a day. And when he finally decided to sell his employer, the man he wanted to sell to was the only other person in Hearthcross who had ever run an office. I did not go. I sent his request to the council in writing. Principle was not the whole reason. I could hear the private trade already. He would offer me a ledger, I would take it, and Cor Hale would be right that the city had become a route to my case. Leja, Yara, and Oda questioned him. 2 hours. I sat outside on a barrel because I was a witness, and a witness does not speak. Yara Dren ran it. That surprised everyone except Yara. She had been in the city for 6 weeks and took Soltvay apart with the patience of a woman who had spent more than a decade selling grain to an occupying army and knew exactly what a frightened middleman sounded like. She caught the lie inside 20 minutes. Solt began with the Customs House vault at Black Pass. Yara reminded him that her cousins had loaded a sealed record crate out of that surviving vault 9 days after the fire under Crane's haulage and private silver marks. So the vault was emptied 3 years ago, and Solt had been about to sell us a 4-mile walk into a garrison town for nothing. He folded. He gave them the cash. Crane's contract office keeps duplicates. Every office does. The Black Pass records left the burned vault under Crane's haulage and silver marks. But Solt changed the receiving code after departure and reported the crate destroyed before Crane's clerks could open it. For 3 years, Crane searched outside his own chain because only Solt knew the crate had survived and where the substituted code sent it. Solt had hidden that leverage from Crane and from us until it was all he had left to trade. He gave them the consignment number, the receiving yard, the shelf code, and the name of the night clerk who still accepted releases under his broker mark. Farron Ost checked the number against the circuit registry before the council promised anything. The crate existed, had never been lawfully destroyed, and was still listed as sealed transport archives. If any one of those facts had failed, Solt's protection bargain failed with it. The council gave him bounded protection. Not a pardon, not freedom. Testimony in exchange for a locked door in a city that had already stood in that door for him once. And Leah Tomasin wrote the terms and made him read them aloud, which is now a tradition here. The recovery took 9 nights, and the council chose every participant without me. My absence protected both the evidence and the city's decision from the accusation that the operation existed to restore my name. Yara went because she knew the crate marks. Leja went because she was the only person alive who could match a torn cover to a spine. 2 of Bram's cells went, and Ista and a boy from Sedge Ford who could get through a culvert nobody else could fit in. They used the old drainage culvert under the quarry road, the route Crane's raiders had used during the Day 50 attack. I enjoyed that more than I should have. They carried 3 crates of false inventory and let a picket find them. They walked the actual archive out as the 4th consignment under a public bonded store ledger, because a bonded store had to release it to the named broker, and Soltve had signed the release. The false crates concealed the retrieval team, not the evidence. The witnesses carried nothing they could lose in a roadside search. The archive never left its recorded chain. The night clerk entered Solt's release. Yara matched the silver stamp before accepting it, and 2 households witnessed the seal breaking only after it reached Farron Ost. Crane could call the route embarrassing. He could not call the pages planted. Crane called it theft. The bonded ledger called it a release. Leja opened it on Edda's table before dawn with Yara, Oda, Farron Ost, and Bram present. Ost allowed me in as the signatory. I stood at the back and touched nothing. The pages matched the cover. The spine tore true, tooth for tooth, 3 years apart. 12 wagons. Numbered. Listed as broken beyond use on the manifest I read at Black Pass at the 10th hour, and listed on the facing page in the same clerk's hand as loaded and moving under private consignment with a silver mark and a private payment schedule and Alric Crane's countersignature. He had not hidden it. The truth sat beside the lie in the same book. Crane trusted that ledger never to leave his office, and a man like him had no reason to falsify the private account he used to count his own profit. Leja read the wagon numbers out loud. Then she stopped at the 4th one and put her hand flat on the page and did not move for a while. Nobody in that room said anything. Yara put a hand on her back. Ost wrote. I did not speak. There was nothing in me that had any right to be in that room, and I knew it. And I stood at the back with my hands behind me while a widow read the wagon that would have carried her husband. Crane came for the forge a week and a half later. He had watched a blockade fail to starve us and found the obvious dependency. The forge made the tools made the houses. He had stolen them during the Day 50 raid because he understood their value. He came with an order reaching plant and stock owned or controlled by Darien Vale or by a single Hearthcross camp authority, a bailiff, and 12 of Severin's men to keep the peace. Severin had to provide them, so he did it in daylight and warned us. The bailiff read his order at the forge door and asked for the owner. Brinsay said there is no camp owner. He asked for title. Bryn handed him the cooperative agreement lodged with Farron Ost. 7 named smiths owned the building, hearth, and anvil jointly. The tools were separately titled to the crews using them and were then in 10 sheds. Hearth time was a rota, not property held by Darien or a camp authority. The agreement was not a defense written that morning. Ost's ledger carried the date the rebuilt forge was gifted, all 7 marks, the inventory accepted with it, and every later tool transfer. The ownership had existed before the blockade and before Crane requested his writ. The bailiff compared those names with his order. He could seize assets owned by the named debtor. He could not take third-party plant merely because it stood inside Hearthcross without a new order naming its owners. He recorded the anvil, the agreement, and the empty tool racks, then left with nothing. Crane could file 7 new claims, but he could not turn 1 writ into ownership, while a circuit record contradicted him. I watched that from the drain, 400 strides away, leaning on a shovel, and I have never been so completely useless or so entirely satisfied. Severin's men watched it too, and that mattered more than the forge. He came to see me afterward, which he did not have to do, and he found me in a ditch. He said his men had reported a seizure that failed because there was nothing to seize. He said he had spent the winter waiting for Hearthcross to collapse into a command structure the moment its famous organizer was taken out of it, because that is what settlements do, and that is the entire basis of his argument, and it had not happened. Then he said the thing I had wanted since he first rode into Ashbank. He said that if Hearthcross brought the original pages to Black Pass in person with its witnesses, he would authenticate the military timestamps against his own retreat log. Not for me. He also issued a written garrison engineering access order. Savin and Tessa could install a reversible gate release and temporary braces under military inspection. He had warned a minister about the timing 3 years ago and wanted to know, in court, whether the wagons had been real. The order named the existing winch housing, forbade cutting original gate stone, let Severin's engineer halt unsafe work, and required every added pin and brace to be removable after the hearing. Savin signed those limits before he ever saw the gate. He said one more thing before he rode out, and it is the closest he ever came to an apology to anyone. He said he had been half right for 3 years. Absence of control did not kill those people. Somebody's control did. He said he still did not know what to do with that, and that he would find out at Black Pass. After Severin rode out, Tessa came to the lower ditch, checked the section I had finished that day, and said the fall was good. Then she said Savin was taking a gate crew to Black Pass and that she had put my name on it. I asked whether that meant my keys were coming back. She said no. She said the yard key stays with the city, my line stays off her board, and the public hearing on my suspension will happen when the city gets around to it, and Black Pass changes none of that. She said she was asking whether I would carry timber for Savin Row, under Savin's plan, at Savin's word, on the ground where I closed a gate on 900 people. I said yes before she finished the sentence. She nodded once and went to check a flue, and that is the closest thing to a courtship I have ever been offered, and I would not trade it for a kingdom. Black Pass runs 4 miles between steep rock walls, with a customs house at the lower end and an outer gate at the upper. I had not seen either since the night I closed the gate on 900 people. We came up the South Road in the last week of winter with 109 of us and 10 wagons. Before leaving, we split every civic key, witness, and piece of evidence so one wagon could never take 2. All 4 civic keys traveled, and none shared a wagon. Oda came with the trade key and the wagon order. Etta carried the health key while Ista drove, leaving no single ambush able to silence the city's ascent. The rotating defense key was held by Sella's household. She had crawled into a gorse patch after boars in the spring and would hand the key on when the 20th day lot ended. Tessa had the construction key and rode at the back with the braces. Yara Dren carried the manifest pages. Leja carried the cover strip. They rode in different wagons, 400 strides apart, because Yara pointed out that a page and its cover in one cart is one cart. Farron Ost carried his own record and rode where he liked, because he answers to a bench. Sult Vey came in irons under bounded protection with 2 households guarding him, who had drawn the duty by lot. And I carried timber for Savin Row. That was my entire commission. Gate crew, 3rd position under Savin, with a written note from Tessa on the crew board that said Darien Vale may not instruct any person outside this crew. The city had not lifted my suspension. The hearing was still scheduled for a date nobody had set. I came to Black Pass as labor, and every soul in that convoy knew it, and that is the only reason the convoy worked. I walked under the outer gate on the first afternoon with a beam on my shoulder and nobody watching me do it. I had expected something. 3 years of expecting something. What is actually there is a stone arch, a winch housing, a groove worn in the sill where the counterweight runs, and a great deal of ordinary weather. The groove is 9 inches deep, 40 years of gates closing. Mine is somewhere in it, and you cannot tell which one. Savin was up in the housing with his release, swearing at a bolt, and he saw me stop and asked whether I was going to stand in the doorway all day or bring him the beam. So I brought him the beam. That was my homecoming to Black Pass, and I would not change it. Crane had the court. He held the customs bench at Black Pass under a transport commission that let him convene assessments in his own house. He had 3 years of paper, a garrison town's worth of contract men, and the enormous advantage of being the only person present who was not on trial for something. He also had a plan, and it was the same plan. I recognized Crane's plan from the road. Seeing it did not give me authority or enough hands to stop it alone. Crane needed the witnesses dead, and needed it to be lawful. The only lawful way to kill 100 civilians in a pass is military necessity, and the only way to get military necessity is to make somebody in authority close that outer gate with people still outside it. He was going to attack both approaches, panic the throat, and hand the fastest man present a reason to shut the gate. He had done it once. It had worked perfectly. The man he had done it to was walking up his road carrying a beam. The attacks came at the 9th hour on the 2nd day, and they came on both approaches at once, exactly as they had 3 years ago, and I had 4 hours of warning because Bram's rim scouts are children and children look at hillsides. By the time the attacks began, every response had already been assigned. Nobody assembled or waited for a plan. 109 people moved through decisions made months earlier in separate arguments at Hearthcross. It had all been decided in a quarry, in the autumn, in a dozen separate arguments that I had mostly lost. Savin's release was already in the gate under Severin's written engineering access order. A garrison engineer had inspected each reversible fitting, and no original stone had been cut. He had spent 6 days building it into the old winch housing, and it is the single cleverest object I have ever seen a human being make. The outer gate at Black Pass drops on a counterweight, and one man can close it in 9 seconds. That is a design feature. That is why 900 people died. Savin's release put 4 locks on it. 4 separate pins, 4 separate keys, 4 different hands, and the gate cannot close unless all 4 are pulled before the counterweight drops. He did not put a master on it. I asked him. He looked at me the way a smith looks at a man who has just suggested a hole in a hull. Bram's cells were on both approaches before the first arrow, in 4 groups that could not be given a single order, lighting identification lamps so that a contract man in an ordinary coat could not stand next to a Hearthcross family and be mistaken for one. Oda had the wagons spaced at 40 strides through the throat. 40 strides is the number I gave her on the causeway on the night I destroyed my own city, and she had taken it and used it, and never once mentioned where it came from. Etta had casualty stations at both abutments. A station beyond a closed gate is a decoration, and she had heard me say that at 4 in the morning while holding somebody else's baby. Ket was under the pass with the lower team. Solt's haulage release carried an unexplained maintenance charge for a lower silver drain absent from the public survey. Ket followed its water and air current toward a route nobody had used in 40 years. Tessa's braces went into the customs house roof and the throat's south wall. Temporary, ugly, and they saved 12 people when the contract troops fired the old scarp. And Yara Dren chose the crossing order because they were her families in the last 4 wagons, and it was her decision to be last. I asked her why. She said that if the gate closed, it would catch the people who came from the enemy side, and she wanted every soul in the convoy to know it and walk past her to get inside. Nobody argued with her. The crossing order belonged to Yara because the people exposed at the rear were hers, and she kept that decision. Crane offered me the seal at the 10th hour. He came down from the customs house in person, in the middle of an attack he had arranged, with a clerk and a wooden case, and he found me on the gate crew with a beam on my shoulder, and he was entirely calm because the man has never once raised his voice in his life. The case had my seal in it. After the Causeway night, the council surrendered it to Farron Ost's evidence record. An independent circuit order required the exhibit at Black Pass for comparison, under Ost's and the court clerk's 2 custody cords. It had not been released to Crane. His contract clerk cut both cords during the attack and carried the case down. Ost followed with the broken seals in his hand. Crane also had a table and 41 blanks. Each already bore my seal's impression. He had known from his 2-yard inventories that 41 wagon forms would be available on the damn night, stamped the same number before planting the die in the recovered road box, and kept the undated sheets for whatever order his next trap required. He did not hide them. He put them on the table as an offer. Crane wanted the choice to look voluntary, because that made the trap useful twice. There were 12 Hearthcross people pinned on the south approach at that moment under fire from his own troops. And Alric Crane pointed at 41 pre-stamped blanks and told me that one order in my hand would move Severin's men onto that scarp inside 4 minutes. He was right. It would have. That is why the offer works. He said the gates and yards would honor the impression before anyone could challenge it. That was true. It did not make an order from a revoked office lawful. He said I could save 12 people in 4 minutes and discuss authority afterward. The same arithmetic as the Causeway. He was right about that too. The Causeway evacuees were alive. That is what he had come down the hill to say. Not a threat, not a bribe. Alric Crane walked into an attack to remind me that I had been right the last time and to hand me the instrument, and to let me be right again. He understood me better than anyone except Leja. Every detail had been arranged around that exact reflex. I took the seal out of the case. Then I put it face down on the gate's stone sill and hit it with the beam I was carrying. And the die face broke in 4 pieces. And I did it in front of Farron Ost, a clerk, and 12 of Severin's men. Crane did not move. He watched a 3-year-old asset become gravel, and his expression did not change, and I have never respected and hated a man so much in 1 second. I gave the pieces in all 41 blanks to Ost under the eyes of the court clerk and Severin soldiers and asked him to enter the broken custody cords with them. My contribution to the Battle of Black Pass was breaking a piece of iron and filling in a form. The 12 people on the south approach came off it 4 minutes later, because Bram's second cell had already moved without an order before Crane had finished making his offer, and I did not know because nobody tells the timber crew anything. The rescue had already started while the great man was being tempted. Hearthcross no longer needed his decision before it could move. Crane ordered the gate closed at the 11th hour. He did it properly. He stood in the throat with his commission in his hand and declared a military necessity, with Yara's last 4 wagons 200 strides outside and the contract troops firing from the scarp, and he ordered General Cassian Severin to close the outer gate of Black Pass. It was the same order, same gate, same reason, same wagons at the back, and the people in them were, once again, the ones somebody had decided were not really ours. Severin refused. He did not make a speech. He said there was no necessity because Kett's lower route was open and had been moving civilians for 2 hours. Military necessity required that no viable alternative remain. Then he said the second half, and the second half was the whole war. He said that a commissioner cannot order a general to close a gate on civilians. The last time it happened, the order had been signed by a minister who also believed there was no alternative. On that night, the alternative had been 12 wagons sitting in this man's private consignment. Crane had marked them as broken. He read it into the record from the manifest, in the throat, during the attack, wagon numbers, the private silver mark, the payment schedule, Crane's countersignature, and his own retreat log's timestamps beside them, matching to the quarter hour. Cassian Severin authenticated 3 years of evidence in a stone corridor with arrows in the air. Since Black Pass, he had believed the absence of control killed those people. The manifest showed what one man's control had done. Crane's troops went for the bridge pins. The old service bridge in the throat is pinned the same way it was in my war, and the contract men knew it, and they went for the pins because a dropped bridge in that throat cuts the convoy in half and makes a necessity out of nothing. Harl and Brinsay held separate brace stations, one at each abutment, because Tessa builds everything twice, and Bryn has checked every pin she has touched since a fine saw cut 2/3 through one over a ravine. They did not fight the contract men. Bram's cells and Severin's loyal soldiers held the approaches while Harl and Bryn worked behind stone splinter screens, driving wedges and keeping the temporary braces loaded. The bridge sagged a handspan when the pins came out and did not fall because its weight had already transferred into Tessa's supports. Savin ran the release with both arms. The 4 gate release keys, separate from Hearthcross's civic keys, belonged to Yara, Oda, Sella's rotating defense household, and Tor of Sedge Ford. Crane obtained 1 wax copy after threatening 2 sons left in the valley. Hearthcross did not punish the household. During the scarp fight, a contract man cut Tor's key from his belt. Crane could pull 2 locks. Yara and Oda retained the other 2, and Savin kept both pins seated. 2 out of 4 left the gate locked open. Yara's last wagon came through at the 12th hour, with Yara walking beside the wheel, and the gate at Black Pass stayed open, and 900 people were still dead, and nothing about that changed, and 109 of us came out of that throat alive. Crane went for the tunnel. There is a 400-stride private cut under the customs house, dug for silver 40 years ago. Crane kept it off every public survey, but the maintenance charge in Solt's release paid to clear its drain and exposed its lower mouth. Kett had opened it at dawn, not for Crane. Kett traced the drain, cold draft, and fresh tool marks for 2 days, opened the silver cut from its lower mouth, put lamps in it, and ran 12 families out while the attack was still going. Ulrich Crane ran 400 strides down his own secret tunnel and came out into a lamplit civilian evacuation route with a Sedge Ford boy directing traffic at the mouth of it. Severin's lawful guard took him at the exit. Not us, not me. A frontier general's provost, on a warrant, with a clerk present, and I was 400 strides away on a gate crew and did not see it. The court sat for 10 days. I testified last. That was Ost's ordering, and it was correct, because by the time I stood up, there was nothing left to prove and only one thing left to say. I said I closed the gate. I said I signed the order at the 10th hour on the manifest in front of me, that the manifest said 12 wagons were broken, that Severin had warned me about the timing, and that I decided the people behind my timetable no longer had a vote. Then they asked me the question I had been waiting 3 years for. They asked whether I would have signed it if I had known the wagons were real. I said I did not know. I said that a man who will not wait 90 minutes for 4 keys above a broken dam is a man who would probably have found another reason, and that the court should weigh my answer accordingly. Farron Ost wrote it down, all of it. Crane's system came apart on paper. The falsified manifest exposed his private consignment and the diverted wagons. Solt's crate mark tied him to the Ashbank arson. His tax endorsement tied him to the dye consignment. His own clerk confirmed that Crane had refused to explain the stolen certification dies months earlier. The suppressed seal revocation entry, the broken evidence cords, and 41 pre-stamped blanks completed the chain. Leja read the wagon numbers. Yara matched the marks. Solt gave the haulage. Severin gave the timestamps. Four people who had every reason to hate each other, saying four true things in an order that nobody could interrupt. The court recognized the Hearthcross Charter. Its household roll named all 118 families, including the 18 admitted after the first count, with the same civic rights. Not because we deserved it. The finding was short, and I have read it more times than I will admit. Its reasoning was entirely practical. Hearthcross was a self-governing civil settlement rather than a private command. Trade, health, defense, and construction had continued through a blockade, a seizure attempt, and an armed action at Black Pass. During all of it, the only man the Crown had ever accused of commanding Hearthcross was under civic suspension and carrying timber. Crane had spent months arguing that Hearthcross was one man. The city answered by functioning through my suspension and the attack without my command. The circuit bench voided Crane's commission, froze his route contracts and private silver accounts for restitution, and remanded him for transport fraud, sabotage, evidence tampering, and the attempted killing of civilians at Black Pass. Solt's bounded protection remained exactly that. It was not a pardon. Darien Vale was not restored to the ministry. Nobody proposed it. Severin was asked formally whether he would recommend it, and he said no, in one word, and I have never agreed with a man more completely. We went home in the spring. Nell asked her question in the doorway of the first house. Its door bar still used the gallows release lever. She asked whether the house was really theirs, or whether it had been the minister's all along, and he had lent it to them. She was 9, and had spent a winter listening to a whole city argue about what belongs to whom. Leja Tomasin put the plain iron key in her daughter's hand and said it was theirs, that it had been theirs since the first night, and that nobody had ever lent them anything. Then she said the rest of it, and she said it looking at me, and it is the last thing she ever said to me about Black Pass. She said the man who built it does not own it, and he does not own her, and he does not own what she thinks of him, and that she was not going to say the word I had been waiting 3 years to hear, because it was not hers to give, and it was not mine to have. She said Nell has a dry roof and a city with 4 keys in it, and that is what he owes, and that is what he paid, and it will never be enough, and it is not nothing. Then she took her daughter inside and shut her own door. Tessa found me on the terrace that evening with a key in her hand. Iron, plain, slightly crooked, because Pell had filed it in about 4 minutes, and Pell has never done a careful thing at speed in his life. She said there is a room above her workshop. It has a window that does not shut properly, a floor she has meant to level all winter, and forge noise at first hour because Bryn takes the first heat. She also warned that Bryn used the stair before dawn and would step over a former minister before she walked around him. She said the room is hers, the workshop is hers, the building is hers, and it always will be, and I do not get a claim, a lien, a say in the work below, or a vote on the window. She said all of that first, deliberately, in order, watching my face. Because she is Tessa Marr, and she was going to make absolutely certain I understood what I was being offered before I was allowed to want it. Then she asked whether I wanted the key. I took it. Nothing happened. No piles, no accounting. Tessa said I had not given her anything. Then she took the hand holding the key and led me up the outside stair to a room with a window that does not shut.
This story was never really about a power that doubles timber. It was about the difference between taking responsibility and taking control. Darien could build walls, open roads, and save hundreds, but the city became safe only when other people kept their keys, their votes, and the right to tell him no. The lesson is not that leaders should stop acting when danger comes. Real leadership creates people and systems capable of acting without waiting for one hero. Guilt cannot be erased by one grand sacrifice, but it can be answered through honest consequences, changed behavior, and the patient work of giving power back.